The sun in the Arizona Territory, sometime in the late 1870s, did not just shine. It attacked. It was a hammer of white heat that struck the anvil of the earth, day after day, until the very air seemed to shimmer with exhaustion. It bleached the bones of cattle and baked the red dust until it cracked into 1,000 fissures, gaping like thirsty mouths. High above, where the air was thinner and offered no relief, a trio of buzzards turned slow. Patient circles. They were waiting. Everyone in this land, it seemed, was waiting. For rain, for riches, or for death. Down below, the land itself was being torn open. A raw, dark line of iron and splintered wood cut across the flats. A scar that steamed in the morning heat. This was the railroad. It did not belong. It was an intrusion of noise and metal, slicing through the ancestral heart of the Apache, ignoring the spirits of the canyons and the ancient paths of the deer, the sound of its creation. The rhythmic clang of steel on steel was a new, violent heartbeat laid over the silence of the desert. The air was tight, stretched thin like old canvas. You could feel the tension coming off the soldiers in their heavy blue wool, their faces caked with alkali dust. You could feel it from the railroad men, their bodies slick with sweat, their eyes hollowed by the labor and the fear. And most of all, you could feel it from the Apache, who watched from the broken hills. They were ghosts in their own land, their faces impossible to read, their allotted patch of earth growing poorer and smaller by the day. Inside the belly of that iron snake, in a car reserved for the engineers and their families, Virginia Hart pressed her cheek against the hot glass. The soot and the suffocating heat were a physical weight. She was 19 years old, and she felt the grit settling into the fine lace at her throat, a lace that had been woven in the green, damp air of Boston. She was a daughter of the East, her mind filled with books and watercolors and the polite sound of pianofortes in shaded parlors. Her body, her spirit, was still untouched by hardship or a man. Her innocence was so profound, so bright in this dusty, violent world, that the other women who had traveled part of the way had taken to calling her Virgin. It had started as a small, cruel joke on her name, Virginia, but it had stuck, following her across the continent. Virgin Hart. She hated the name. It made her feel like a specimen, something fragile to be observed. Yet, she also knew it was true. She was still whole, still unbroken by the world her father was so eager to build, a world that seemed designed to break everything it touched. Beside her, Alexander Hart stared out the window not at the heat, but at the future. He was an engineer, a man of calculations and steel, a true believer in the manifest destiny of steam and iron. He saw progress where the buzzards saw death. "It is civilization. Ginny," he said, his voice firm over the clatter of the wheels, his gaze fixed on the endless line of track they were laying. "We are bringing water and commerce and a future to this empty place. We are binding the nation together." Ginny nodded, because it was her duty to nod. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to be a good daughter, a good citizen of the nation he was helping to stretch from sea to shining sea. But the place did not feel empty. It felt watchful. "And you," he continued, turning to her, his gaze softening. His eyes were proud, but practical. He was a man who solved problems. "You will have your own future secured, a future of safety and respect." Ginny felt a small, cold stone drop into her stomach. "Father?" "Mercy Ridge is not just a job for me. It is a new life for you. A man of importance has taken notice." He paused, clearing his throat. "Captain Nathaniel Briggs. He commands the fort. He is a fine man. Ginny, a rising star in the army, from a good family back east. He has asked for your hand, and I have given him my blessing. It will be finalized when we arrive at Fort Mercy." Her breath caught. You mean you have arranged a marriage?" "I have arranged your security," he corrected gently, mistaking her shock for maidenly nerves. "This is a hard country." "Virginia, especially for a woman alone. Captain Briggs can offer you a fortress against this whole wild land. He is your safe ticket. But the land was not empty. Miles away, high on a sandstone bluff that resembled a hawk's head, a man watched the train. His name was Dasan, the name his mother gave him before the soldiers came. The white men, in the brief time he had scouted for them, called him Greyhawk. He was Apache. He sat his pony without a saddle, his body lean and marked with the scars of campaigns fought for his people, and campaigns fought, foolishly, for the United States Army. He had worn the blue coat. He had served as a scout, believing the words of a white general who spoke of peace, believing he could guide them away from the sacred places, toward a shared understanding. He had been wrong. The general had used his knowledge to map the hidden springs. And then the soldiers had come. He had lost his younger brother in the ensuing skirmish, a boy shot while running. Now, Greyhawk belonged nowhere. He was mistrusted by his own people for having worn the coat, and hated by the soldiers for having left their service. He understood the telegraph, the repeating rifle, and the railroad. Yet his heart remained with the whisper of the wind gods and the spirits of the mountain. He watched the iron snake, the thing that polluted the springs and frightened the game, and his heart was a cold, hard stone in his own chest. The train was moving slowly now, laboring on a slight incline as it approached the pass. Ginny, turning away from her father's suffocating talk of marriage, looked out again. Her eyes scanned the horizon, desperate for something green, something soft, something that reminded her of home. Instead, she saw him. He was impossibly far at first, a speck of darkness against the blinding red rock, a silhouette against the sky. But she saw him. The train's rhythm was clack, 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 and with each beat, he seemed to grow clearer. He was not the painted devil from the dime novels in Boston. He was not screaming or waving a weapon. He was just watching, still as the rock he was on. She could not see his eyes, but she felt his gaze. It passed right through the hot glass, through her muslin dress, and touched the part of her that was still virgin, the part that was still wild and uncatalogued. A shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. The air in her lungs felt suddenly too thin. She felt a sudden, terrifying pang of fear, but mixed with it was something else, a strange, sharp pull toward the very freedom her father was trying to wall out, a freedom that felt as vast and dangerous as the man on the rock. The train whistle shrieked, a sound that tore the air. The image was gone. Mercy Ridge appeared, rising from the dust not as a town, but as a wound. It was an argument with the desert, a collection of raw lumber buildings, a saloon, its doors already swinging, spilling loud music into the late afternoon. A white-painted church, its steeple looking brittle against the enormous sky. A squat railroad office, and beyond it, the looming, protective, suffocating stockade of Fort Mercy. The platform was a chaos of blue uniforms, dusty prospectors, women hiding their faces behind bonnets, and men whose eyes were too bright with whiskey. And there, standing apart from the grime, as if he were immune to it, was the man her father had promised her to. Captain Nathaniel Briggs was everything the dime novel said a hero should be. He was tall, his uniform was impeccably pressed, and the relentless sun flashed on the brass buttons and the hilt of his saber. He commanded respect. The soldiers snapped to attention. The townsfolk nodded his way with deference. He smiled as Alexander Hart stepped down, shaking his hand firmly. "Mr. Hart, a pleasure. You have made excellent time. The final line is mapped. We are ready for you." "Excellent, Captain. A fine piece of work." Her father turned, reaching for her. "And this is my daughter, Virginia." Captain Briggs removed his hat. His hair was blonde, his eyes a sharp, clear blue that seemed to hold no warmth, only light. He took her hand, bowing over it in a gesture that was strikingly Eastern. "Miss Hart, welcome to Mercy Ridge." His grip was firm. his touch proprietary, as if she were a new acquisition. "You have come to the edge of the wilderness, but I assure you, we shall tame it for you." Ginny murmured something polite, her hand feeling small and trapped in his. Her eyes darted past his shoulder. She could hear the talk from the platform, the whispers of the other women. "That's her, the engineer's girl. Heard she's for the captain. Lucky woman. Poor thing, straight from the east. She'll be cooked dry in a month." And darker whispers from the men near the saloon. "Need more soldiers. The Apache are restless. Briggs will fix them. He's not afraid to get his hands bloody. Hates the savages." She saw what they meant. Across the street, penned into a dusty patch of ground near the telegraph office, several Apache families were gathered, waiting for their weekly government rations. They were guarded by 2 bored soldiers. The Apache looked thin and tired, and their eyes were filled with a profound emptiness. They looked nothing like the man on the rock. That night, Ginny stood at the window of the small, clean room provided for her in the fort. It was safe. It was secure. The walls were thick. Captain Briggs had explained his ambition over dinner: a promotion, a swift end to the Apache problem, and a civilized life for her. He spoke of the Apache as if they were a pest, like wolves or coyotes, to be cleared for the advancement of progress. She knew she ought to be grateful. She wanted to be a good person, to help her father bring order to the chaos. But her dreams were not of fortresses. Her dreams were of the open, terrifying sky she had seen from the train. She was not sure she wanted to be the wife of a man who saw this land only as something to be conquered. Miles away, in the dark hills, Greyhawk sat by his own fire. It was small, giving off almost no smoke. He, too, was trapped. His body bore the scars of a dozen battles. He had seen his cousin shot down in a raid, his aunt die of starvation on the reservation. He had sworn an oath to protect the last of his people, the last of the sacred lands. But he was not a fool. He knew that to fight the railroad with arrows and old rifles was suicide. To fight with blood meant extinction. Yet to do nothing meant watching his world die a slow, suffocating death. The night settled over the Arizona desert. From her high window, Ginny could see the 2 worlds. Below her, in Mercy Ridge, the saloon lights blazed yellow. She could hear a tinny piano and the roar of men drinking, the sounds of the new civilization. And far out, so far she could barely see it, was another light, a single, stubborn pinprick of orange fire in the blackness of the high desert. The Apache camp. She stood there for a long time, her hand on the cold window, caught between the 2 flames, her heart a battleground she did not understand. The night was cold, and the wilderness was vast, and she was already terribly, terribly alone. The railroad celebration at Fort Mercy was a contradiction, a desperate performance of civilization against a backdrop of raw, red dust. Lanterns strung between the barracks and the officers' quarters cast a weak, yellow glow, fighting against the immense, star-filled darkness of the Arizona sky. A fiddle and a banjo, playing slightly out of tune, scraped out a reel from back east. Men in blue wool, their faces scrubbed clean, danced stiffly with women in borrowed silk, their laughter sounding brittle in the vast quiet. Virginia Hart felt like a prop in this performance. She was dressed in a pale blue gown that her father had ordered from a catalog, the fabric stiff and foreign against her skin. She had been presented, passed from officer to officer, her hand patted, her courage praised. She was, in this moment, the physical symbol of everything they were fighting for, a pale, delicate woman to be protected. "You see, Virginia," Captain Nathaniel Briggs said, his voice a low, confident rumble in her ear. He had steered her away from the dancers, onto the small balcony of his quarters. Away from the chaperones, his hand rested possessively on the small of her back. "This is what we are building. Order." He gestured out at the night. Beyond the lanterns of the fort, the desert was a black, silent ocean. "It is a wasteland, waiting for a firm hand. We must tame it. We must bring it to heel, just as we must the savages who infest it. He turned his gaze from the desert to her. His blue eyes were bright, but cold, like chips of ice. And you, my dear, are the reward for that order, the very picture of civilization. He moved his hand from her back, letting his fingers graze her arm, a touch that was both intimate and impersonal, like a man assessing a fine horse. Ginny felt a sudden, suffocating tightness in her chest. The high collar of her dress seemed to be choking her. He spoke of taming the land as he would speak of taming a dog, or perhaps taming a wife. She was his safe ticket, her father had said. She felt, in that moment, more like a piece of newly acquired territory. A sudden commotion from the parade ground below broke the tension. Shouts, the heavy clop of horses, and the unmistakable metallic rattle of chains. "Ah, my apologies," Briggs said. His interest piqued. "It seems my hunting party has returned with trophies." He led her back down into the main square, just as soldiers were dismounting, dragging several exhausted, dust-covered figures into the center of the lantern light. They were Apache. 3 men and 2 women, their hands bound, their expressions carved from stone. The music stopped. The dancers gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and cruel curiosity. "Caught them near the Whisper Creek Pass. Captain," a corporal shouted, his chest puffed with pride. "Suspected of raiding the supply wagon near 3 Forks. One prisoner stood apart from the others, though he was bound just as tightly. He was taller than the others, his body lean, his hair unbound, even covered in grime. There was an unbroken quality to him. Ginny recognized him instantly. It was the man from the rock, the man who had watched the train. "This one," the corporal said, shoving the tall prisoner forward, "is Greyhawk. He is a troublemaker, and arrogant." Greyhawk did not stumble. He simply stood, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the fort's walls. "Bow your head to the captain. Savage!" the corporal snarled. Greyhawk did not move. He did not blink. The corporal, angered by the public defiance, reversed his rifle and struck the prisoner across the ribs with the wooden stock. The sound was a dull, wet thud. Greyhawk grunted, bending slightly, but he did not fall, and he did not lower his eyes. A gasp escaped Ginny's lips. It was a small sound, but in the sudden silence, it seemed to echo. "That's enough, Corporal," Briggs said, his voice laced with annoyance. Not at the blow, but at the public display. He glanced at Ginny, noting her pale face. "My dear, you look faint. This is not for your eyes. This is simply the necessary application of discipline. It is the only language they understand." He gestured for a lieutenant. "Take Miss Hart for some punch. Lock this one up separately. He needs to be taught manners." Ginny felt herself being led away, her feet moving as if in a dream. The justice she was meant to marry was a man who watched another man be beaten for the sin of pride and called it manners. Later, the party resumed, louder now, fueled by the victory. Ginny, claiming a headache, slipped away from the music. She found herself drifting, as if pulled by an invisible string, toward the back of the fort, near the stables and the small, windowless blockhouse that served as the jail. The night air was cooler here. She saw him. They had not put him in the cell, but had chained him to a support post for the stable roof. Like an animal, he was alone. Briggs found her there, his steps silent. "Virginia, you should not be out here." What will happen to him?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the shadow tied to the post. "He will be questioned. If he is guilty, he will hang. If he is innocent, he will still hang. Most likely, it serves as a good example," Briggs said flatly. "Do not waste your pity on him. He would slit your throat for the silver buttons on your dress." He was called away by another officer, leaving her in the shadows. She should have returned to the party. She should have gone to her room. Instead, she looked around, her heart hammering. A wooden bucket of water for the horses sat by the trough. Her hands, shaking, found the tin dipper. She moved like a thief, her silk dress whispering in the dirt. He did not look up until her shadow fell over him. He raised his head. In the dim light, she could see a dark bruise forming on his cheekbone, and a cut on his lip. His eyes were not empty, like the other prisoners. They were full of a cold, intelligent fire. He looked at her, and at the dipper in her hand. He did not beg. He did not ask. She held it out. "Water." He watched her for a long second, his gaze searching her face, as if he were memorizing a map. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. He drank. He drank deeply, his throat working. When he finished, he did not lean back. He remained close, his eyes holding hers. His voice was low, a rasp that sounded like the desert itself. His English was perfect, clipped, and full of contempt. His woman. The question struck her harder than the corporal's rifle butt had struck him. He was not asking if she was the captain's fiancée. He was asking if she was his property. Ginny flinched, dropping the dipper. It clattered on the stones. She turned and fled, the sound of the fiddle returning as she ran, her cheeks burning with a shame she could not name. The next day, the sun rose with its usual, brutal intensity. Ginny, exhausted and heartsick, was informed by her father that she would accompany him and two of the other officers' wives into Mercy Ridge to inspect the new site for the railroad station. The trip was meant to be a distraction, a return to normalcy. They traveled in a heavy spring wagon, unarmed save for the driver, who had a pistol on his hip. The trip to the town was uneventful, but on the way back, as they passed through a narrow cut between two red rock mesas, the world exploded. A high, terrifying shriek echoed off the canyon walls. It was a war cry. A shot rang out, and the driver slumped over, grabbing his chest. The horses screamed and reared. Another shot, and one of the women in the back, a Mrs. Davies, crumpled forward with a small, surprised sound. "Apache!" the other wife screamed, grabbing Ginny. Men on horseback poured down the sides of the cut. They were painted, their faces streaked with red and black. They wore feathered war bonnets. They fired wildly, hitting the wagon, the horses, the rocks. The wagon, its driver dead, slammed into the canyon wall and tipped, throwing Ginny and the screaming woman into the dust. Ginny's head struck the ground. For a moment, she saw only spots of white. When her vision cleared, she saw the raiders. One was standing over the body of Mrs. Davies, pulling the rings from her fingers. Another was approaching the surviving woman, a long knife in his hand. "This cannot be happening," Ginny thought. "This is a nightmare." The man with the knife looked at Ginny. He smiled, his teeth stained. He raised his rifle, aiming it at her. Ginny closed her eyes, bracing for the end. She heard a sound that was not a rifle. It was a thwack, like an arrow hitting a ripe melon. She opened her eyes. The man who had been aiming at her was staring in surprise at the feathered shaft protruding from his own throat. He fell. From the rocks above, a figure moved. It was not a painted raider. It was a ghost. Greyhawk. He was on foot, armed only with a knife and a bow. He dropped from the rocks, landing silently behind the man who was looting Mrs. Davies. His knife moved once, a quick, brutal flash at the man's throat. The third raider, the one who had been killing the horses, turned, raising his rifle. Greyhawk was already moving. He threw his knife. It spun end over end, burying itself in the raider's chest. It was over in 10 seconds. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Ginny stared, her lungs frozen. The man from the fort, the prisoner, the savage. He had just saved her life. He stood among the bodies, his chest heaving, his face a mask of cold fury. He pulled his knife from the dead man and walked toward her. Ginny scrambled backward, terrified. He stopped, his eyes meeting hers. There was no pity in them, only a cold, hard assessment.
The sound of horses, fast, from the end of the canyon. More raiders, or soldiers.
Greyhawk did not wait to find out. The last raider, the one with the arrow, had fallen near his horse. Greyhawk grabbed the reins. He looked at Ginny, struggling in the dust, her blue dress ripped, her face bloody. Another volley of gunfire echoed from the mouth of the canyon. He made a decision. He strode forward, and before Ginny could scream, he had grabbed her around the waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He threw her onto the horse, leaping up behind her, his arm a steel band around her ribs, his other hand grabbing the reins.
"No!"
she screamed, beating at his arm.
"Let me go help!"
She thought he was kidnapping her. From the canyon mouth, a patrol of blue-coated soldiers appeared. They saw the carnage. They saw the dead women. They saw the tipped wagon. And they saw, silhouetted against the red rock, an Apache warrior on a pony, his arm clamped around the struggling, white-gowned body of the captain's fiancée.
"Fire!" the lieutenant roared. "They have got Miss Hart."
Bullets zipped past them, chipping the stone.
Greyhawk kicked the horse into a gallop, not toward the fort, but away,
deep into the labyrinth of canyons where the soldiers would not, or could not, follow. The news reached Fort Mercy an hour later, carried by the frantic, surviving patrol. The report was simple, a brutal Apache massacre. The women were dead, and the warrior, Greyhawk, had been seen kidnapping Virginia Hart. Captain Nathaniel Briggs listened, his face hardening. He did not waste a moment on grief. He walked to the telegraph office, his mind already calculating. This was not a tragedy. It was a gift, the perfect ironclad justification. He would have his war. As the sun began to set, Greyhawk rode on, the horse blowing hard. Ginny had long since fallen silent, slumping against him, unconscious from the shock and the fall. He felt the light, warm weight of her body against his. She was the daughter of the man building the railroad, the promised wife of the man who had beaten him. She was the embodiment of the world that was choking the life from his people. He should have left her in the dust. He should have let the soldiers' bullets find her. But he had not. He looked down at the pale curve of her cheek, her hair unbound and tangled, and he felt a cold, bitter anger at his own weakness. He pulled his blanket from his saddle roll and wrapped it around her, his hand brushing the softness of her throat. He could not save his people, but he had, for some reason he could not understand, saved her. He rode on into the gathering darkness, carrying his unwelcome breathing prize. Her first sensation was of stone, hard, unyielding rock beneath her back, pressing into her spine. Her second was the smell. It was not the familiar, stifling scent of a room at the fort, nor the iron and soot smell of the train. This was the smell of dust, of old smoke, and something else, something sharp and clean, like juniper, mixed with the unfamiliar, warm scent of another person. Virginia Hart's eyes flew open. The world was shadow and dim, gray light. She was not in a room. She was in a small hollow of rock, a shallow cave. The opening, a ragged triangle of light, looked out onto a vast, empty expanse of desert, painted in the bruised, exhausted colors of late afternoon. A horse, a sturdy Apache pony, was tethered to a stunted bush just outside. She was alone with him. The memory of the attack returned, a tidal wave of smoke, screams, and blood. The women, Mrs. Davies, the painted faces, and then him, Greyhawk, the man from the fort. He had not been painted. He had killed the others. He had taken her. She scrambled backward, crab walking on her palms until her back hit the solid wall of the cave. Her breath came in short, terrified gasps. Her hands flew to her throat, her torn dress. She was a prisoner, a captive. Everything she had ever read in the Boston papers, every whispered, terrified story about what the Apache did to white women, flooded her mind. She screamed. It was a thin, ragged sound that the dry air seemed to drink instantly. He appeared in the mouth of the cave, blocking the light. He had been outside, watching not her, but the sky. He moved with a silence that was more frightening than a shout. He looked at her, his face unreadable, his dark eyes taking in her panic. "Ah, let me go," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Take me back to the fort, you murderer, you savage!" She gathered her feet under her body tensing to run, though there was nowhere to go but past him. He took one step inside, and she flattened herself against the rock, her hands raised as if to ward off a blow. He stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not move to touch her. He simply spoke, his English as cold and clear as winter water. "I saved your life." "You killed those men," she sobbed, her terror making her bold. "You are a kidnapper. Take me back, my father, Captain Briggs. They will hunt you down." His expression did not change, but a flicker of something dark and ancient passed through his eyes. "Your people shot first. Your people kill my people. Those men," he gestured back toward the canyon they had left, "were not my people. They were white men, dressed as Apache, painted like fools. Your captain's men." She stared at him, her mind unable to process his words. White men painted it made no sense. "You are lying." "It does not matter," he said, turning his back on her. He looked out at the sky again. "They kill, we kill. It is the only way now. I demand you take me back." He looked over his shoulder. "No." He said it with such finality that her breath caught, but then he looked up, and his whole body tensed, like an animal scenting danger. He was not looking at the trail. He was looking at the horizon, which was no longer blue. It was a sickly, churning yellow. A low moaning sound had begun, a sound that was not in her head. It was the wind, coming from everywhere at once. What is that?" she whispered, her panic shifting. "We must stay," he said, his voice flat. He pointed to the pony, who was turning in anxious circles, pulling at its tether. "The horse knows. We go out in that, we die. The sand will strip the skin from your bones in an hour." Ginny crept to the mouth of the cave, her fear of him momentarily forgotten. The sky was darkening, the sun disappearing behind a wall of moving, yellow-brown cloud that was racing toward them. The wind was rising, shrieking now, and it had teeth. It threw a handful of grit and sand into the cave that stung her face like needles. She stumbled back, covering her mouth, coughing. Greyhawk was already moving. He untethered the pony, leading the frightened animal into a deeper recess of the cave, a small side channel she had not seen. He soothed it with a few low, clicking words in his own language. He then returned to the main hollow, his back to her, and began to work. He had a small bundle, and from it, he took a piece of dry wood and a drill. He worked with a patient, efficient rhythm, and soon a tiny spark grew into a small, blessed flame. He fed it chips of dry wood he had in his pack, and a small, nearly smokeless fire began to glow in the center of the cave, pushing back the gathering cold. The world outside vanished. The storm hit with the force of a solid object. It was a screaming, howling darkness. Sand poured into the cave mouth, rattling like dry seeds. The temperature plummeted, the desert heat vanishing in an instant, replaced by a biting, highland cold. Ginny was shaking, her body racked with shivers, partly from cold, partly from shock. Her thin blue dress, ripped and dusty, offered no warmth. He looked at her, his face lit by the fire. He said nothing. He unfastened the blanket from his saddle roll, the one he had wrapped her in earlier. It was a thick woven wool, smelling of horse and smoke. He tossed it to her. She caught it, surprised. It was his only blanket. She wrapped it around her shoulders, her fingers clumsy, The wool was rough, but it was warm. He had given her his blanket, and now he sat on the other side of the fire, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the flames. He kept his distance. He made no move toward her. He simply sat, a guardian, a captor, a savior. She did not know what he was. The storm howled for hours. It was a prison, but it was also a strange, intimate sanctuary. There was nothing in the world but the two of them, the small fire, and the wind screaming like a lost soul. Ginny found herself watching him. She had never been this close to a man. Not really, certainly not a man like him. The firelight played on the strong lines of his face, the high cheekbones, the straight, proud nose. She saw the ugly, dark bruise on his cheek from the soldier's rifle. She saw the angry red cut on his lip. She saw the long, white scar that ran from his temple down his jaw, a map of some old, terrible violence. His body, visible beneath his buckskin shirt, was not bulky like Captain Briggs's. It was lean, ropey, all sinew and corded muscle, like a hunting cat. He was not the devil she had been taught to fear. He was something else. Something dangerous, yes, but something that had been hurt. His eyes, when he glanced at the fire, were not just fierce. In the flickering light, she saw a profound, weary sadness that resonated with a loneliness deep inside her own heart. Greyhawk was aware of her watching him. He could feel her gaze on his skin. He had seen women like her before, in the white men's towns. They were soft, like birds in cages, their faces pale, their hands unmarked by work. They smelled of soap and fear. But this one, she was afraid. Yes, she shook, but she had not wept again. She had not become a useless, screaming burden. She sat there, clutching his blanket around her like a queen wearing her robes, her chin held at a proud, if trembling, angle. She was trying to maintain her Eastern manners in the heart of a sandstorm, captured by an Apache. The thought was so strange, it almost made him smile, but he had not smiled in a very long time. The silence, stretched between the howls of the wind, became its own language. He broke it. "You are the engineer's daughter." It was not a question. She flinched. "Yes, Alexander Hart." "Hart," he repeated. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. "He draws the lines. The iron snake follows, and the soldiers follow the snake." He looked up, his eyes pinning her. "And you are the woman for the captain, Briggs, the one who beats men in chains." Ginny's face burned. He said you were a criminal, that you attacked a wagon." Greyhawk let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "He calls me criminal, while he pays white trash to paint their faces and kill women to start his war. He wanted a reason. Now he has one. He has his massacre, and he has his lost, white woman to rescue." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed. "Your father draws the lines that tear the flesh from our land, and your captain draws blood to water those lines. You are part of their world." She had no answer. For the first time, she was hearing the story from the other side. She was not hearing about savages and progress. She was hearing about land being torn, about lies and manufactured wars. And a part of her, the part that had shivered when she saw him on the rock, knew he was telling the truth. The storm began to fade as the first pale hint of dawn touched the sky. The wind died, leaving an eerie, exhausted silence. The cave was covered in a layer of fine, red dust. Greyhawk rose to his feet. His body was stiff, but he moved with grace. He went to the mouth of the cave. The world was new, scoured clean, the air cold and sharp. "The storm is over," he said, not looking at her. "I will take you back." She scrambled to her feet, the blanket falling. "You will." He turned, his face hard again in the morning light. "I will take you near the fort, close enough for you to walk. Then I disappear." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "My honor is satisfied. I saved your life, You did not die in the storm. What your people do to me after, that is their own. I will not have your death on my hands." He did not want to keep her. He was not a kidnapper. He was a man with a code she did not understand. He still chose his duty, his world. The ride back was silent. He put her on the horse and walked beside it, his hand on the animal's neck. He moved with a long, loping stride that ate the miles. Ginny sat, her hands clutching the pommel, her mind a riot of confusion, fear, and a new, strange guilt. They reached the crest of a low ridge. Below them, not half a mile away, was Fort Mercy. The flag was already flying.
"Go,"
he said, slapping the horse's rump.
"They will see you."
"Wait," she said, pulling on the reins.
"Greyhawk,
What could she say? "Thank you, I am sorry." A glint of sun on metal from the valley floor. A patrol. They had been spotted.
"Go now,"
he yelled, and this time he hit the horse hard. The pony lunged forward, carrying her down the slope. Ginny looked back. The patrol, 4 soldiers, was galloping toward them. Rifles raised. They were fanning out. Greyhawk was trapped. He did not run. He simply stood, tall and still against the skyline. The soldiers, seeing Ginny, did not slow. They saw only him. They opened fire.
"No!"
Ginny screamed.
"Stop! He saved me!"
But her voice was lost in the wind and the pounding of hooves. Greyhawk was forced to drop from the ridge, seeking cover, but they were on him in a moment. He shoved her, hard, off the horse as the soldiers skidded to a halt around them. She landed in the dust.
"Got the bastard!"
one soldier yelled. Greyhawk stood, his hands raised, empty. It did not matter. The butt of a rifle came from the side, striking him in the head. He fell to one knee. Another blow, to the ribs. They were on him, dragging him to his feet, tying his hands with a rawhide thong, their faces contorted with hate. "We got him. Miss Hart. Don't you worry, we got the animal that took you." They dragged him, bleeding from a new cut on his head, back toward the fort. Ginny, sobbing and stumbling, was put back on the horse and led in their wake. The entire fort was waiting at the gates. Her father ran to her, his face a mask of gray terror, his arms pulling her from the horse. "Virginia! My God, child, are you hurt?" And then Captain Briggs. His face was not relieved. It was a cold, hard mask of controlled fury. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, pulling her away from her father. His voice was loud, for all the assembled soldiers and townsfolk to hear. "Did he touch you, Virginia? Tell me, what did this animal do to you?" Ginny's head spun. She looked at her father, at the crowd, and at Greyhawk. He was standing between 2 soldiers, his hands bound, his shirt stained with his own blood. He was looking at her. His gaze was not pleading. It was a cold, knowing, terrible judgment. He knew what she was. He knew what she would do. She saw the betrayal in his eyes before she spoke. She was so scared. Scared of Briggs's anger, scared of the whispers, scared of what it meant to have been alone with him. Her reputation, her honor, her entire future depended on this moment. She stammered, her voice a thin whisper. She looked at Briggs, at his furious, demanding face.
"Tell me,"
Briggs roared. "He took me," she finally whispered, the words choking her. It was the truth, but it was not the whole truth. It was the only truth they wanted to hear. A murmur went through the crowd. Briggs's face tightened in triumph. He had his confession. He had his proof. Greyhawk closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, the judgment was gone. There was only a vast, cold emptiness. He turned his head and looked away from her. "Take him to the stockade," Briggs commanded. "He hangs in the morning." The soldiers shoved Greyhawk, and he stumbled, but he did not fall. He walked, his back straight, toward the prison. Ginny, her legs giving way, sank to her knees in the dust. She covered her face with her hands and wept, the dry, hacking sobs of the truly damned. She had just sold the life of the only man who had ever truly saved her. The air in Fort Mercy was no longer just tense. It was electric, buzzing with the righteous energy of a holy war. The kidnapping of Virginia Hart, the fiancée of its commanding officer, had been the spark. The story had been polished to a bright, terrible sheen, a savage brute, a heroic rescue by the patrol, and a pure white woman defiled by the experience. Captain Briggs had his justification, and he used it like a whetstone, sharpening the fort's bloodlust. He was everywhere, his voice crisp and commanding, his orders precise. Men were cleaning rifles, checking ammunition, oiling the leather of their saddles. The parade ground, once a place of sleepy drills, now thrummed with purpose. Ginny heard the talk. It was impossible to avoid. She heard it in the officers' mess, where she was forced to take her meals, a silent, pale trophy at her father's side.
"Wipe them out, I say,"
a young lieutenant declared, his voice high with excitement. "Sweep the whole savage lot of them clear. How can the railroad progress with this vermin on its flank?" "Briggs is right. You cannot reason with them," another agreed, slicing his salt pork with unnecessary force. "This greyhawk animal is the worst of the lot. Hanging is too good for him." They would glance at her, their voices dropping to a murmur of false sympathy. "You are safe now, Miss Hart. We will teach them a lesson they will never forget." Ginny would just nod, her food untouched, the taste of ash in her mouth. She was not safe. Her nights were a siege. Sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of terror. She was back in the cave, the wind screaming, the air thick with sand. She was on the horse, her back pressed against the solid, warm strength of his chest. And then, always, the end she was standing in the dust of the fort, his eyes meeting hers, that cold, knowing, final look of betrayal. She would wake up gasping, her own hands clutched at her throat, her nightgown damp with sweat. She had to tell the truth. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in her stomach that made it hard to breathe. She found Captain Briggs in his office, maps spread across his desk like the skin of a flayed animal. "Captain," she began, her voice shaking slightly. He looked up, his blue eyes impatient but softening with practiced charm. "Virginia, my dear, you should be resting." "I cannot rest," she said, her hands twisting in the folds of her skirt. "We must talk about what happened, about that man, Greyhawk." "There is nothing to talk about," he said, his voice hardening, the charm vanishing. "The animal is in chains. He will hang tomorrow, as planned." "No, you do not understand," she insisted, desperation making her voice rise. It was not like they said. The other men, they were white men, painted. He told me, and he saved me. From them, and from the storm. He gave me his blanket." Briggs stood up. He walked around the desk, not to comfort her, but to stand over her. He was very tall. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip not gentle, but firm, possessive. "Virginia," he said, his voice low and condescending, as if speaking to a child who had seen a ghost. "You were terrified. You were in shock. Your mind has played tricks on you. Put ideas in your head. They are cunning. These savages." He probably frightened you into believing his lies. He smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "I know what they are. My dear, I have fought them for 5 years. They are liars. They are animals. He saved you, perhaps, but only as a wolf saves a lamb, to devour it later. Now, you will forget this. You will put it from your mind. I have handled it. You are safe." He was dismissing her. He was telling her that her own memory, her own truth, was a fiction. He patted her shoulder, a final, proprietary gesture. "Now, go and rest. The ladies of the fort are planning a social for the railroad investors. You should help. She left his office, her body cold. He had not listened. He had not wanted to listen. She realized, with a sickening jolt, that her defilement was more useful to him than her rescue. She felt trapped, suffocated by the lies, by the wool uniforms, by the fort's thick walls. She had to do something. The idea came to her as she passed the post-chaplain, Reverend Michaels, reading his Bible under a sliver of shade. Atonement. She could not save Greyhawk's life with her words. Briggs had made that clear. But perhaps she could do something for his people, to ease the stone in her gut. She went to her father, and then to the chaplain. "Father, Reverend," she said, her voice low and earnest. "I wish to do God's work. I wish to help the Apache children on the reservation. They have nothing. I wish to open a school, to teach them to read, to teach them our ways." Her father looked at her, his engineer's mind confused by this emotional request. "Ginny, that is highly irregular and dangerous." But the Reverend's eyes lit up. "Miss Hart, what a truly Christian gesture to bring the light of the Lord and the light of education to those poor, benighted souls, an olive branch." Before her father could protest further, the door of the office opened, and Captain Briggs entered. He had overheard the last part. His face was a thundercloud. "Absolutely not," he said. "It is out of the question. It is a war zone. I will not have my fiancée. I will not have you risking your life in that nest of vipers." "But, Captain," the Reverend sputtered, "it is a mission of peace. Think of the good it could do." "I think of her safety," Briggs snapped. "You said you had handled them," Ginny said, her voice quiet, but with a new, sharp edge that surprised them all. "You said they were beaten. Am I not safe even in the reservation, with your soldiers everywhere? Or are they still a threat?" It was a challenge. Briggs's eyes narrowed. He saw the trap. He saw the earnest, foolish faces of the chaplain and her father. He saw his own political maneuvering. And then, his expression shifted. The anger was replaced by a cold, sudden calculation. A teacher, a white woman, his fiancée, going to them. It was useful. "You are right," he said, his voice shifting to one of deep, reluctant consideration. "I am being overprotective. Perhaps a show of goodwill, led by you, would be strategic, a bridge, to show them the benefits of cooperation while the hostiles are being rooted out." He turned to her. "Very well. I will allow it. I will assign a guard. But you will be careful." He was agreeing, but as Ginny met his gaze, she knew it was not for her reasons. She was not an olive branch. She was a tool. Another one. She was his eyes and ears, his intelligence bridge, a way to monitor the camp while he planned his war. Her first visit to the Apache settlement was a descent into another world. It was not a camp. It was a prison, penned in by a coil of dusty, barren land and watched from 2 guard towers. The shelter was a collection of torn canvas, scraps of army blankets, and teepees made of rotting hides. The smell was of despair, of unwashed bodies, of bad water, and a profound, lingering hunger. The soldiers of her escort stayed at the perimeter, their rifles held ready. Ginny walked in alone, carrying a wooden box with a slate, chalk, and a few children's primers from Boston. The children, their bellies swollen, their eyes huge and dark in their thin faces, watched her as if she were a ghost. The adults, the few old men and the women, simply stared, their faces masks of profound, unbreachable emptiness. And then, a woman emerged from one of the larger teepees. She was young, perhaps Ginny's age, but her face was hard, carved by grief and rage. She was beautiful, in a sharp, fierce way. She moved with a proud, straight-backed anger. She walked up to Ginny and just stood, looking at her. "What do you want?" the woman asked. Her English was as good as Greyhawk's. I am here to teach." Ginny stammered, holding up the primer as if it were a cross to ward off a vampire. "The children. I want to teach them to read." The woman looked at the book. Then she looked at Ginny's clean dress. Then she spat on the ground at Ginny's feet. "We do not need your books," she said, her voice low and shaking with contempt. "We need food. We need our land. We need the murderers out of our camp." She pointed a long, brown finger at Ginny's chest. "We do not need the captain's woman." "Please," Ginny whispered, her face pale. "I just want to help." "Go help your own kind," the woman said, and turned her back. Ginny stood there, humiliated, defeated, and then she saw him. He was at the far end of the camp, near the dry creek bed. His hanging had been postponed. It was more useful. Briggs had apparently decided to use him as an example of a different kind. He was in leg irons, the chain connecting his ankles clinking with every move. He was doing hard labor, digging a latrine trench under the watchful eye of 2 guards. He was being used as a menial, a beast of burden. Their eyes met across the dusty expanse. For a single, breathless moment, the world stopped. She saw the new cut on his head, the heavy bruises. He saw her, the teacher, standing in the heart of his people's misery. Ginny took a step toward him, her hand half raised, his name a whisper on her lips. Greyhawk held her gaze for 1 second longer, and then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his back on her. He bent to his work, his shoulders set, his whole body a statement of her non-existence. He had made her invisible. It was the cruelest cut of all, worse than a blow, worse than a curse. He had erased her. But Ginny did not run. She stood there, her heart breaking, and she understood. This was her penance. She came back the next day, and the next. She brought no books. She sat on the ground, in the dust, and she took out her slate. The children, drawn by a curiosity stronger than their parents' warnings, crept closer. She did not try to teach them the alphabet. She drew a picture, a bird. A small, dirty hand reached out and pointed. "Tsaidu," the child whispered. Ginny smiled. She erased the bird. She drew a horse. "Cavallo." She learned their words. She drew maps, not of railroads, but of the hills around them, of the places the rivers used to be, of the old hunting grounds her father's maps had erased. She brought biscuits she had saved from her own dinner. She brought a bottle of cough medicine she had bought from the sutler. Darlin, Greyhawk's sister, watched her. The hatred in her eyes did not fade, but it was joined by a profound, wary confusion. One day, after Ginny had cleaned a cut on a small boy's leg, Darlin spoke again. "He is my brother," she said, her voice flat. Ginny looked up, her heart stopping. "Greyhawk." "He saved you," Darlin stated. It was not a question. "And you let them take him. You sent him to the gallows." I was afraid," Ginny whispered, the confession tearing from her. "We are all afraid," Darlin said, gesturing to the camp. "But fear does not make a lie into a truth. You cannot save our children's bodies with biscuits," she said, her voice rising. "If you are still standing with the men who are killing their souls." She softened, just a fraction. "He is a good man. He was a great warrior. Now, he digs in the dirt." She walked away, leaving Ginny to her shame. The moment came a week later. The afternoon was hot, the air thick and sullen. A corporal, a man Ginny recognized from the fort, stumbled into the settlement. He was drunk. His tunic was unbuttoned, his face flushed. "Well, well," he slurred, catching sight of Ginny, who was surrounded by a small group of children. "If it ain't the little teacher, come to give us all a lesson. Have you?" He lurched toward her, a leering grin on his face. "Why don't you teach me something? Miss Hart, something private." He reached for her, his hand grabbing her arm. Ginny cried out and tried to pull away.
"Get off her,"
a voice commanded. It was Greyhawk. He was 50 feet away, his shovel in his hand. He had dropped it. He was moving, fast, the leg irons forcing him into a clattering, awkward lope. He did not touch the soldier. He did not have a weapon. He simply placed himself between Ginny and the corporal, his body a solid wall. He was breathing hard, his eyes blazing.
"Get out of the way, you filth!"
the corporal spat, shoving him. Greyhawk did not move. He was rooted to the earth. The corporal, enraged, drew back his fist and struck Greyhawk square in the jaw, in the same place the rifle butt had hit him. The guards were running now, shouting, "He's resisting! The prisoner is resisting!" They fell on Greyhawk, their rifle stocks rising and falling. He did not fight back. He simply fell to his knees, his arms raised to protect his head, his back to the soldier, his body still a shield for her. "Stop!" Ginny screamed, throwing herself at the guards. "Stop it! He was protecting me. That man attacked me." The corporal, sobered by the violence, was already backing away. I did not. She's lying." The guards, confused, stopped. Ginny was on her knees in the dust next to Greyhawk, who was coughing, blood trickling from his mouth. He had been beaten for resisting. He had been beaten for her. Again, she realized, with a terrible, clear certainty, that even after she had betrayed him, his first, deepest instinct was still to protect her. She returned to the fort that evening, her dress stained with dirt and a small spot of his blood. She was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. She passed Captain Briggs's office. The door was ajar. The voices from inside low and urgent. "Cannot wait. Wallace." Briggs was saying, "The investors are impatient. The army wants results."
"But the treaty, Captain,"
another voice said, a civilian's voice. "Sacred Canyon is protected. We cannot legally run the survey through there." "The treaty is a piece of paper." Briggs's voice was a low growl. "That canyon has the only fresh water for 50 miles. The railroad must have it. We just need an excuse, a significant event, something that proves the Apache have broken the treaty first." "Another raid," the civilian, Wallace, asked. "A bigger one," Briggs said. "One they cannot ignore back east. One that will force the army to cleanse the area. For good. I have men who can handle it. Men who know how to look the part." Ginny's blood ran cold. White men, painted like fools. She leaned against the wall, her hand over her mouth. This was not about her. It was not about one savage. It was about water. It was about land. And it was about a deliberate, cold-blooded plan to commit mass murder for profit. She fled to her room. She was locked in, not by a key, but by the fortress, by her father, by her skin color, by the man she was supposed to marry. She sat at her small, mahogany desk. She pulled out her diary, the one with the embossed flowers, a gift from her aunt in Boston. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She began to write, the words pouring out, the ink spotting the page. "My name is Virginia Hart. I am a liar. Captain Briggs is a murderer. The raid, it was white men. He is planning to kill them all. For land. For the railroad. Greyhawk is innocent. He is innocent. He saved my life." She wrote it all down. The cave, the storm, the blanket, the confession in the dust, the drunk soldier, the conversation in the office. When she finished, she looked at the pages. They were her own death warrant. To speak this truth would be to declare war on Captain Briggs, to betray her father, to destroy her own life, her own honor beyond repair. But to be silent was to be complicit in the murder of an entire people, and to be silent was to let Greyhawk, the man who had protected her even after she had condemned him, die for a crime he did not commit. She closed the book. Her conscience, that small, Eastern-bred thing, was finally, terribly, awake. She knew what she had to do. The diary entry did not lessen the weight. It only gave it a name. Ginny's guilt was a living thing, a shadow that sat on her chest when she tried to sleep. She had to see him, not just for her own atonement, but to look in the eyes of the man she had wronged and, for one moment, not be a coward. She went to the settlement the next afternoon. She carried a small tin of water and, in her other hand, a pathetic small clutch of purple wild owers, tiny blossoms of impossible color she had found struggling against the fort's foundation. He was where he always was, at the edge of the camp, hammering rocks into smaller pieces for a new drainage ditch. The leg irons were still on him, but his hands were free for the work. The guard, a young, bored private, watched from a distance, slumped under the meager shade of a canvas tarp. Ginny approached, her feet silent in the thick dust. The private lifted his head, annoyed, but seeing it was only the captain's woman, he let his head drop again. Greyhawk did not look up, but his rhythm faltered. The heavy hammer paused in mid-swing. He knew she was there. He could feel her presence, the scent of her fear and her eastern soap. "Greyhawk," she said. Her voice was a dry croak. He continued to stare at the rock in front of him. He did not grant her his attention. She stepped closer, into his line of sight, and knelt, placing the tin of water and the drooping flowers on the hot ground beside him. "I brought you water," she whispered. "And these—" He turned his head then, slowly. His eyes were not filled with the cold fire she remembered. They were flat, dead, as empty as the desert at noon. He looked at the flowers. He looked at the water. Then he looked at her. "I do not need your pity," he said, his voice low, each word a chip of ice. "And I will not drink the water of the one who sold me." The words struck her, a physical blow. She flinched, pulling her hands back as if she had been burned. I did not mean—" "What did you mean?" he asked, his voice lethally soft. He turned his body slightly, the chains clinking, to face her fully. "In the desert, a word is water. It is life. You let them drink my honor. You let them take my name and turn it into animal." "I was wrong," she choked, the tears she had held back for days finally breaking free. They were hot, stinging, cutting channels in the dust on her cheeks. "I was wrong. I was a coward. I was so afraid of him, of what they would think." She was sobbing now, kneeling in the dirt in front of him, a prisoner in chains, and she was the one who was undone. "I am so sorry. I did not know how to be brave." He watched her cry. His expression did not soften. He had seen white women cry before. It was often a prelude to some new, terrible demand. But her sobs were not performative. They were the raw, ugly sounds of a soul breaking. He saw no manipulation in her gaze, only a profound, wretched shame that mirrored his own. He was ashamed of his chains. She was ashamed of her freedom. He looked away, back to the rocks. "Your tears do not change the truth. They do not stop the hanging." He lifted the hammer. "Go away, white woman. Your games are not for me." He raised the hammer and brought it down, shattering the rock between them. The sound was a final, violent crack. Ginny scrambled to her feet, her face stained, and fled, the wilted flowers lying abandoned in the dust. That afternoon, the sky turned. The sullen, oppressive heat of the morning gave way to a strange, bruised purple light. The air, which had been still, began to twitch. Huge, dark-bellied clouds, the color of old lead, came rolling in over the mountains, fast, like a conquering army. The first clap of thunder was not a rumble. It was a crack, as if the sky itself had split open. And then the rain came. It was not the gentle, life-giving rain of the east. It was a biblical deluge, a violent assault. The water did not fall in drops. It fell in solid, driving sheets. The dry, baked earth, unable to absorb such a sudden blessing, turned to running mud. Within minutes, the dry creek bed that bordered the Apache camp, The same one where Greyhawk was working, was no longer dry. A low roar began to build, a sound deeper than the thunder. It was the sound of water, tons of it, funneled by the high canyons, pouring into the lowlands.
Flash flood!
The guards in the towers shouted, their voices thin against the storm.
Flash flood!
In the settlement, panic erupted. The Apache mothers, Darlin among them, were screaming, trying to gather their children, who were being pelted by the rain and hail. The creek bed was now a churning, brown river, 6 feet deep, its banks collapsing. 2 small children, the same ones who had first learned the word for bird from Ginny, were caught on the wrong side, their small shelter of canvas torn away. The water swirled around their knees, rising fast. Ginny, who had been huddled in the small lean-to she used as a school, saw them. She ran out into the storm, screaming for help, trying to reach them. The mud sucked at her boots, pulling her down. And then she saw Greyhawk. He was no longer chained to his rock. The guards, in their own panic, had forgotten him. He was standing near the bank, his own leg iron still on. He looked at the children. He looked at the rising water. With a sound, a low roar that was not human, he lunged. He did not run to the guards for a key. He grabbed the heavy chain that bound his ankles, braced his feet, and pulled. The iron links, weakened by weeks of hammering on rock, strained. The muscles in his back and arms corded, his entire body a single, focused act of will. The central link snapped. He was free. He did not hesitate. He plunged into the churning, muddy water, the broken chains dragging from his ankles. He fought the current, his powerful strokes taking him to the children. He grabbed one under each arm, lifting them high, and began the agonizing fight back to the bank. Ginny, desperate to help, had waded in too far. The bank beneath her feet, undercut by the water, suddenly gave way. She slipped, crying out as the cold, shockingly fast current grabbed her, pulling her under. She came up sputtering, her heavy skirts dragging her down. She was moving, fast, toward the main, violent channel. A hand, hard as iron, clamped onto her arm. He had thrown the children onto the muddy bank, into Darlin's waiting arms, and turned back. Just in time. He had her. He was still in the water, his feet braced, the current tearing at both of them. "Climb!" he roared at her over the sound of the storm. He was not pulling her out. He was using his own body as an anchor, a human wall against the flood. He pointed to a small ledge of rock just above their heads, part of the ditch he had been digging. Ginny, half drowned and terrified, clawed at the mud, but her fingers found no purchase. He shoved her, hard, his hand on her backside, lifting her. "Climb!" She found a foothold. She dragged her soaked, heavy body onto the ledge, which was barely a foot wide. She was out. She turned, reaching for him. Greyhawk. He was still in the water, the flood now at his chest. The broken chains on his ankles snagged on something under the surface. He was trapped.
"The knife!" he yelled, pointing to his own belt. "In my belt."
Ginny did not think. She lay on her stomach, her arms stretched down, her fingers fumbling with the wet leather. She felt the smooth, bone handle of his knife. She pulled it free from its sheath. "Cut the root by my left foot." She leaned out. So far she almost fell and saw it. A thick, dark root, exposed by the flood, had tangled in his chains, holding him fast as the water rose. She hacked at it, the sharp blade biting into the wood. She sawed, her arm aching. The root snapped. He was free. With a final, massive surge of strength, he hauled himself up, out of the water, and collapsed onto the narrow ledge beside her, his body pressing against hers, his breath coming in great, ragged gasps. They were soaked, covered in mud, and shivering. The rain was still coming down, though lighter now. They were trapped on a tiny island of rock, inches above a raging brown river, in a shallow cave formed by the overhanging bank. "The children!" Ginny gasped, her teeth chattering. "Safe," he panted, turning his head. Across the water, on the high ground, they could see Darlin, herding the children into the relative safety of the chaplain's wagon. They were alone. The guards, the Apache, the entire world was on the other side of the flood. Ginny's body began to shake violently, the cold and the shock taking over. Greyhawk watched her, his own breathing still harsh. He was shivering, too. He unfastened the heavy, sodden blanket from his saddle, which had been left near his work area, miraculously untouched. It was soaked, but it was wool. He did not ask. He simply draped it, heavy and wet, over both of them, pulling it tight around their shoulders. It was a miserable, shared shelter, but in the cold, driving wind, their combined body heat, trapped under the wool, began to create a small pocket of meager warmth. She was pressed against his side, from her shoulder to her knee. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest, the solid strength of his thigh. She was acutely, terrifyingly aware of his body, of his warmth. He smelled of rain and mud and man. She was shaking too hard to speak. He felt her trembling. His hand, which was resting on the blanket near her shoulder, moved. He did not put his arm around her. It was a more hesitant, more surprising gesture. His fingers, rough and calloused, went to her hair, which was a tangled, muddy mess, plastered to her face. Gently, his fingers stiff and awkward, he brushed a long, wet strand of hair back from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. It was a gesture of such profound, unexpected tenderness that it stopped her breath. He let his hand fall, his gaze shifting to the rain. "You are not as weak as I thought," he said, his voice a low rumble, barely audible over the water. They sat in silence for a long time, sharing the darkness, the blanket, and the cold. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice raw. "Why did you save them? Why did you save me after what I did?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. "The children are Apache," he said, as if that explained everything. "They are the future. They are the only thing that matters. And me." He turned his head. In the dim, gray light, his eyes were very dark. "I do not know. I think I am tired of death. Even yours." He told her, then, not all at once, but in short, clipped sentences. The words pulled from him by the strange intimacy of the storm. He told her about his mother, who had died of the white man's coughing sickness in a winter camp. He told her about his younger brother, Tahan, the one he had seen shot, the one who had admired his Blue Scout's coat before he, Greyhawk, had learned what a lie that coat was. "I led them," he said, his voice bitter. "I showed them the springs. I thought I was bringing peace. I thought I was showing them we could live together. Instead, I gave them a map to our heart, and they cut it out." Ginny listened, her own shivering forgotten. She felt his pain, a cold, hard stone in her own chest. I never wanted to come here," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out, a confession to match his. "My father, he arranged my marriage to Captain Briggs. He called me his safe ticket. I felt like a piece of property, a political bargain." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I used to dream of being a painter, of painting the ocean. I grew up by the sea. It was so green and cold and alive." He looked at her, a real curiosity in his eyes now. "The sea. I have seen pictures. In the white men's books. Water so big it touches the sky." "Yes," she whispered. "All the water in the world." He was quiet. "We are both," he said, "being used. Your father uses the railroad. Your captain uses you. My people, even they want me to be a warrior, a symbol of a past that is gone. We are both bridges, girl, for other people to walk across." A spark had ignited between them. something deeper than the fear and the guilt. It was respect. She was not virgin heart, the fragile doll, and he was not savage, the animal. They were just two people, trapped on a ledge, their worlds in ruins. In the dim light, his face was very close. She could see the individual drops of water on his eyelashes. She could feel his breath, warm against her cold cheek. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth, which was pale and trembling. The air in the small cave grew thick, charged with something new, something more dangerous than the flood. He leaned in, just a fraction, and then he stopped. He pulled back, his jaw tightening. He looked away, out at the churning water. "You have a promise," he said, his voice harsh. "To another—" The floodwaters began to recede as night fell, leaving them in a world of mud and silence. The soldiers came, eventually, with lanterns, shouting, stunned to find them alive, and together. They were separated. Ginny was taken back to the fort, her father weeping with relief, her body wrapped in a dozen dry blankets. Greyhawk, his broken chains now replaced with new, heavier ones, was taken back to the stockade. But something had changed. The bridge had been crossed. That night, Ginny did not go to the social. She put on her plainest, darkest dress. She brushed her still damp hair, her fingers finding the place he had touched. She walked, her back straight, to Captain Briggs' office. He was there, as she knew he would be, standing with Wallace, the man from the railroad. Their plans had been delayed by the flood, but not, she knew, derailed. "Captain," she said, her voice clear and loud. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption, his face softening when he saw it was her. "Virginia, you should be in bed. You have had a terrible ordeal." "I am not here to talk about my ordeal," she said. "I am here to tell you that I cannot marry you." Wallace, the railroad man, looked up, startled. Briggs' face did not change. "Virginia, you are hysterical. The flood!" "I am not hysterical," she said, her voice like steel. "I am clear. I will not marry you. I will not be the wife of a man who pays thieves to dress as Apache and murder women to start a war. I will not be the wife of a man who plans genocide to steal land." Silence, thick, heavy, and absolute. Wallace looked like he was going to be sick. Briggs's face slowly lost all its color, and then it flushed, a dark, ugly red. The mask of the civilized hero was gone. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was terrifying. "You ungrateful little— Who do you think you are?" "I am Virginia Hart," she said, her heart hammering. "And I will not be your wife." He took a step toward her, his hand raised, and for a second, she thought he would strike her. But he stopped, his military discipline holding him back. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Fine," he snared. "You will not be my wife. You will be a pariah, a ruined woman, a traitor to your own people. You think anyone will believe you, the hysterical girl who was alone with a savage for a night." He smiled, a terrible, cruel smile. "You have just destroyed yourself." He turned to Wallace. "It seems," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "we need to accelerate our plans. The savages have been emboldened by this flood, and it seems they have an ally inside the fort." Ginny's blood ran cold. She overheard the next words as she backed out of the room. "The midnight train, the payroll delivery," Briggs was saying to Wallace. "Have your friends hit that tonight. Make it bloody. Make it look Apache. I will have my men at Sacred Canyon by dawn, and I will teach that stubborn girl and her savage lover what happens when you cross me." She had not saved them. She had doomed them. She ran, not to her father, not to her room. She ran to the stables. She had to get out. She had to warn them. She did not know how to ride well. She did not know the desert. It did not matter. She found a small mare, saddled it with shaking hands, and led it to the back gate. The guard there knew her.
Miss Hart, what are you?
The captain, she lied, her voice breathless. He needs a message delivered to the night patrol, urgently. The guard, seeing her pale, frantic face, believed her. He opened the gate. Virginia Hart, the virgin, the daughter of the East, kicked the mare into a terrified gallop and disappeared into the blackness, riding for the Apache camp, a traitor to her race, and, for the first time in her life, utterly and completely free. The mare, stolen from the fort's stable, was not a desert animal. She was a nervous creature of grain and stall, and she stumbled in the dark, her breath already coming in ragged, wet bursts. Virginia Hart did not know how to ride. She was not riding. She was clinging. Her legs rubbed raw, her hands clenched in the animal's mane. The moon was a sliver, offering no light, and the world was a black, cold, terrifying void. She was guided only by the memory of a pinprick of fire, the one she had seen from her window. She rode toward it, propelled by a fear that was greater than her fear of the dark, or of the Apache. She was propelled by the cold, certain knowledge of a massacre. She rode until the mare was finished, her legs trembling, her head drooping. Ginny slid off, her own legs buckling, and fell to her knees in the dust. She had seen the flicker of a low fire, tucked deep into a rocky ravine. She was close.
That is far enough, white woman.
The voice came from the darkness. A shadow detached itself from a boulder, the moonlight catching the long, dark barrel of a rifle, an Apache sentry, his face invisible. Please, Ginny gasped, her voice gone. She pushed herself to her feet, her hands raised, empty. I have to speak. It is life, death, please. Captain Briggs. You speak his name here, a new voice said, full of ice. Naylin stepped into the faint firelight, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You, the captain's woman, you dare. Darlin, Ginny sobbed, stumbling forward, her body shaking with exhaustion, her dress still stained with the mud of the flood. Please, you must listen. He is coming. He is going to kill you all. Nalin looked at her. She took in the wild, terrified eyes, the bleeding hands, the horse gasping for air. This was not the polite, hesitant teacher. This was a half-mad creature, running from the fort, not to it. This was not a trick. This was terror. He is attacking, Ginny panted, the words pouring out in a rush. Tonight, he is sending men, white men, painted, to attack the payroll train. He will blame you. It is a lie, a trick. He wants Sacred Canyon. He is marching the army there. He will be there at sunrise. He said he would cleanse it. Naylin's hatred wavered, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. She grabbed Ginny's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. Speak to the elders. She was dragged into the small, hidden camp. It was a place of shadows, fear, and weariness. A small, smokeless fire burned, surrounded by a handful of old men and 2 warriors. They looked up, their faces hard, as Nalin pushed Ginny into the light. She told them again. Her voice was hoarse, her words tripping over each other, but she told them everything. The office, the railroad man, the plan for the payroll train, the march on Sacred Canyon. When she finished, there was a terrible silence. One of the older warriors, his face a map of old scars, stood up. He spat into the fire. She is the daughter of the Iron Snake. She is the promised woman of the captain who beats our brothers. This is a white man's trick. They send a crying woman to make us run, to lead us into a true ambush. She is lying, another agreed. We should kill her and send her body back to the fort. Ginny looked around, her heart sinking. They did not believe her. She had come all this way, betrayed her people, and for nothing. She speaks the truth. The voice came from the deepest shadow, from the mouth of a small cave. A figure stepped into the light. Ginny's heart stopped. It was Greyhawk. He was not in chains. He was gaunt, his face bruised and battered, his thigh wrapped in a bloody, makeshift bandage. But he was free. He was alive. He looked at Ginny, his eyes burning in his skull. The elder warrior turned. You, who were their prisoner, you trust this woman?" Greyhawk took a painful step forward, his gaze never leaving Ginny. "I have seen the truth in her eyes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I have seen her lie when she was weak and afraid, and I have seen her risk her life. For my sister, for our children. She comes here now, to this fire, knowing you might kill her. She comes to die. For the truth." He looked at the elders, his face a grim mask. "If she lies, when the sun rises, let my head be on your stake. But she is not lying. Briggs is coming. He wants our water. He wants our blood." The authority in his voice was absolute. The doubt in the elders' faces cleared, replaced by a grim resolve. The old man nodded. "We must move, now. We will not be in Sacred Canyon when the soldiers come." "No," Greyhawk said, his voice sharp. "We will not be there. The women, the children, the old ones, they will go east, into the deep mountains. Now." He looked at Nalin, who nodded, her face pale, and began to go, waking the camp. "But we," Greyhawk said, looking at the two remaining warriors, "will not run blind. He wants a massacre. He must find something. I will take a small party. We will go to the Copper Pass. We will watch. We will see this plan." Tahan, a young man, barely 16, his face bright with a mixture of fear and hero worship, ran forward. He was Greyhawk's cousin, the boy who had lost his own brother, the one who saw Greyhawk as a god. "I am here, Dasan." "You come," Greyhawk said. He turned and found Ginny at his elbow. "Let me come," she whispered, her hands clenched. I am the witness. I must see it." Greyhawk looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw no more fear, only a cold, hard resolve he had not known she possessed. He nodded. "You will ride with me. You started this. You will see the end." Dawn was a cold, gray sickness in the sky. The Copper Pass, the winding, narrow entrance to Sacred Canyon, was silent. Ginny lay on her stomach, her cheek pressed against the cold rock, high on the cliff wall. Below her, hidden in the boulders, were Greyhawk, Tahan, and the two other warriors. She was terrified, her heart a heavy, slow drum against her ribs. They heard them before they saw them. The faint jingle of a harness, a coughed command, the sound of boots on stone. A column of blue-coated soldiers filed into the canyon. They moved in silence, their rifles at the ready, fanning out on both sides of the dry wash. At their head, on a tall black horse, was Captain Nathaniel Briggs. His face was set in a mask of grim determination. He was ready to find his massacre. He raised his hand. The column stopped. He looked around, his eyes sweeping the canyon. It was empty. There was no village. There were no breakfast fires. There were no women, no children. There was only silence and the caw of a distant raven. Ginny watched Briggs's back stiffen. His trap was empty. He was furious. And then, from the other end of the pass, came the sound of more horses. A group of 15, maybe 20 men rode into view. They were not soldiers. They were rough, hard-looking men, their faces hidden by beards and grime. They were the fake Apache. Their leader, a man with a huge, black beard, rode forward, a grin on his face. "Morning. Captain, where's the welcome party? We did our part. That payroll train's a wreck. We left a real Apache-looking mess, just like you paid for." Briggs rode toward him, his voice a low, furious snarl. "You fool, you were supposed to wait for my signal. You've ruined it."
They're gone!
The bandit's grin vanished. He looked around the empty canyon. His eyes narrowed. "You've ruined it. Captain, the village is gone. Our deal was for the payroll and the plunder from this camp. We held up our end. We want our money. All of it. Now. Plus extra. For this mess." The two groups faced each other, soldiers and bandits, their hands dropping to their weapons. High above, Ginny let out a breath she did not know she was holding. Greyhawk whispered beside her, his voice full of contempt.
"White men, just as you said, they have come to fight over their own lies."
Tahan, the boy, was fascinated. He inched forward, trying to get a better view. His eyes wide, he was perched on a small, loose pile of scree. He dislodged a single, small pebble. It was not a loud sound. It just skittered. Tap, 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 down the rock face. Below, a soldier, his nerves stretched thin, heard it.
"Up there!"
he shouted, his voice cracking.
"Movement on the cliff!"
He raised his rifle and fired, a single, blind, panicked shot. Ginny saw it all as if time had slowed to a crawl. "High on the cliff," Tahan grunted. It was a small, surprised sound. He looked down at his chest, a dark stain already spreading on his thin shirt. He looked at Greyhawk, his eyes wide with confusion. "Dasan." He slumped forward and did not move. Ginny clapped her hand over her mouth to stop her own scream. A sound, a low, guttural roar, was torn from Greyhawk's chest. It was a sound of pure, animalistic grief, a sound that was not human. He forgot the soldiers. He forgot the plan. He forgot Ginny. He saw only the boy, the last of his brother's line, the boy who had looked at him like a hero. Tahan. He broke from cover, his legs screaming in protest, scrambling down the rocks. "No, stay back," the other warriors hissed. But he was gone, lost in a red haze of fury and pain. He was fast, but the soldiers below were faster. They had seen him. "It's Greyhawk, it's the rebel!" They opened fire. A volley of lead slammed into the cliff face around him. A bullet tore through the thick muscle of his thigh. Another grazed his arm. He stumbled, falling to his knees beside Tahan's body, his hand reaching out to touch the boy's face. He was trapped, surrounded. Down below, Captain Briggs saw his plan. Shattered, reform into something new, something better. He had his rebel. He had his battle.
"They attacked us!"
he roared, his voice filling the canyon, for all his men to hear. "They were waiting in ambush. Return fire, wipe them out." He pulled his own sidearm. He was not aiming at the cliffs. He was aiming at the black-bearded bandit leader, who was staring at him in shock. Briggs fired. The man grunted, clutching his chest, falling from his horse.
"They're in on it together," Briggs screamed. "The bandits and the savages, kill them all!"
It was chaos. The soldiers, believing their captain, opened fire on the bandits. The bandits, betrayed, fired back. And high on the cliff, the two remaining Apache warriors, trying to escape, were hunted down and shot. Ginny was frozen, her mind unable to comprehend the cold-blooded, evil genius of the man. She watched, in helpless, silent horror, as Briggs manufactured his own war, cleansing the canyon of everyone who knew the truth. The battle was over in 2 minutes. The soldiers were cheering, their blood up.
"Go get him,"
Briggs yelled, pointing to the cliff.
"Bring me Greyhawk alive."
They swarmed up the rocks, dragging Greyhawk down. He was bleeding, semi-conscious, his body limp. They threw him in the dust at Briggs's feet, next to the body of Tahan. Briggs looked down at him, his face a mask of cold triumph.
"You should have hung the first time, you animal."
He sneered. "Now, you will. In the town square, for everyone to see. You are a rebel leader, and you will die as one." Ginny could not stay hidden. She was not the girl from Boston anymore. She scrambled down the cliff, slipping on the loose rock, her hands bleeding. No, she screamed, her voice raw. No, you are lying. He didn't you. You killed them. You paid them. She ran toward Briggs, her hands clenched into fists. Briggs looked at her, and his cold smile widened. Soldiers, he said, his voice laced with false pity. Seize Miss Hart. She is clearly hysterical. The trauma of what these savages have done has broken her poor mind. She is not safe. 2 soldiers grabbed her arms. She struggled, but she was weak, her strength gone. He's the liar, she shrieked, her voice breaking. He's a murderer. He killed Tahan. He's a murderer. A high, keening wail echoed from the mouth of the canyon. Darlin. She had followed at a distance. She had seen it all. She ran past the soldiers, who were too stunned by the carnage to stop her. She threw herself onto Tahan's small, still body. She rocked him, her wail a sound of unimaginable, shattering grief. She looked up, her face a mask of tears and dust. She saw Greyhawk, bloody and chained, being tied to a horse, and she saw Ginny, struggling in the grip of the 2 blue-coated soldiers. You! Nayland shrieked, her voice breaking, her finger pointing at Ginny. You did this. You came to our camp, you. Aquida, you are a white man's poison. You brought them here. You killed him. You killed my brother. No, Ginny sobbed, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. Nayland, no, I tried to warn you. Go, Nayland screamed, turning her back, hiding her face in Tahan's bloody shirt. Go back to your own kind. You have no one here. You have killed us all. Greyhawk was dragged away, tied to a horse, bleeding a trail into the dust. Ginny was escorted back to the fort. A prisoner in all but name, they locked her in her room. For her own protection, her father said, his face gray, his eyes refusing to meet hers. Darlin took the body of her young cousin and led the last broken remnants of her people, their final, flickering trust in the white world extinguished forever, deep into the mountains, where they would never be found. Ginny was left alone, in the silent, safe room, a traitor to her father, a murderer to Nullen. She had lost everything. Virginia Hart was a prisoner. The room her father had provided, the one meant to be her bridal suite, was now her cell. The lock was on the outside. Her father, his face a mask of gray disappointment, his eyes unable to meet hers, called it her protection. She was, by order of the post commander, to be kept safe. She was the hysterical witness, the mad woman, the fort's tragic, broken doll, who must be sheltered from the world and from her own damaged mind. From her window, she watched them build the gallows. It was a stark, ugly thing of new yellow pine, erected in the center of the parade ground. A notice was nailed to the post, and another in the town square. She could not read the words from that distance, but she did not need to. The crier's voice, bellowing from the town's main street, was loud enough to carry on the wind. Greyhawk, Apache rebel, insurrectionist, murderer, and kidnapper, would be publicly hanged in 2 days. The execution was scheduled to coincide with the arrival of the railroad dignitaries. A public demonstration, Captain Briggs had written, of the new era of security and order. It was a performance. Briggs was turning a murder into a celebration. Ginny sat on her bed, not weeping. Her grief and terror had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard coal of rage. She was not a doll. She was not mad, and she would not be his prop. She had 2 days. She was watched, but the guards rotated. She waited. On the 2nd day, a young private brought her evening meal tray. She recognized him. He was young, his face a constellation of freckles, his eyes miserable and averted. He was one of the soldiers who had been trapped on the wrong side of the flood. "Private," she said, her voice low and even. He jumped, sloshing water on the tray. "Ma'am?" "You were there," she said, not a question. "At the flood." His face went pale. Yes, ma'am, I was... He looked at the floor. I saw what he did. He saved those Apache children. He saved you, Ginny said, her voice like steel. Your patrol was on the low ground. You would have been swept away if he had not broken the bank to divert the water. He saved your life, and you are letting them hang him. The private's hands, gripping the tray, were shaking so badly it rattled. I am just a private. Ma'am, I cannot do nothing. You can, she whispered, moving close to the door. Tonight, the midnight guard change. It is always the laziest. All I need is 10 minutes. And the stable gate, the east one, the one that is never used, unlatched. He was terrified. His eyes darted around the hallway. They will hang me, man. They will hang him, she said, her gaze holding his. He saved your life. Is your life not worth his? Give me 10 minutes. Unlatch the gate. That is all I ask. He could not meet her eyes. He nodded, a barely perceptible jerking motion, and fled, leaving the tray on the floor. Ginny had one more piece, Briggs's network of paid thieves. She knew from the guard's gossip that one of the bandits, the one who had survived the canyon, had been captured. He was not in the stockade with the military prisoners. He was in the town's drunk tank. She still had the privileges of the captain's shell-shocked fiancé. She wrote a note, simple and direct, and bribed the laundress who collected her linens to take it to the town jail. She enclosed the only thing of value she had left, a heavy gold locket, a gift from her mother. The note read, Briggs betrayed his last partner in the canyon. You are the only witness. You are next. Help me, and I will tell the railroad men you were a captive, not a partner. I will tell them you helped us. She was betting on the man's hatred of Briggs, a hatred that must be even deeper than his own. She could only pray the laundress would deliver it. The sky itself seemed to agree. That night, the heavens split open. It was not a sandstorm. It was a high mountain thunderstorm, a barrage of cold, driving rain and crackling, blue-white lightning. The fort, baked hard by the sun, could not absorb the water, and the parade ground became a sea of thick, sucking mud. The midnight guard change was a miserable, hurried affair. Men running, heads down, eager to get under cover. Ginny, cloaked in a heavy, dark red blanket she had torn from her bed, slipped out of her room. The young private had not just left the lock, he had jammed it. It had taken her half an hour, but it had yielded. She kept to the deepest shadows, her bare feet sinking into the cold mud. She looked like one of the camp women, her head bowed against the rain. She reached the stockade. He was not in a cell. Briggs was too cruel for that. He was chained, like an animal, to the central post of the small prison yard, exposed to the freezing rain, his head bowed against his chest. He was soaked, his body shaking with cold. The guard was huddled in a small, covered doorway, his back to the prisoner, trying to light a cigarette. Ginny had the key, not to his chains, to the supply lockup. She had stolen it from her father's desk. She fumbled under her blanket, her fingers numb, and pulled out the heaviest thing she had, her father's iron measuring weight, a solid 2-pound block. She crept forward, silent. The guard cursed as the wind blew out his match. Ginny threw the heavy iron weight. It sailed through the air and struck the far tin roof of the stable with a clang so loud it sounded like a gunshot. The guard jumped, his head snapping up. "Who goes there?" he yelled, leveling his rifle at the stable. He took a few steps out into the rain, peering into the darkness, his back completely to Ginny and the prisoner. "Now," Ginny whispered, praying Greyhawk had heard her. He was not asleep. He was not beaten. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard. Greyhawk was on his feet, the length of his chain, which the guard had left long, wrapped around his fists. As the guard turned, confused by the silence from the stable, Greyhawk lunged. He swung the heavy chain like a whip. It wrapped around the guard's neck. He pulled, The guard choked, dropping his rifle, clawing at his throat. Greyhawk did not try to kill him. He just pulled, strong and steady, until the man went limp, slumping unconscious into the mud.
Ginny!
Greyhawk's voice was a rasp, a sound of disbelief. He saw her, a small, dark shadow in the rain. He was fumbling with the guard's keys. An alarm bell began to clang, a frantic, ugly sound. Someone had heard the noise. "This way!" she screamed, pulling him toward the back wall, toward the stables, the east gate. A shot rang out from one of the towers. Then another. They were seen.
Halt, halt, or we fire!
They ran, staggering through the mud. His leg, the one that had been shot, was stiff, and he moved with a profound, painful limp. He put his arm over her shoulder, his weight heavy, and she took his, half dragging, half supporting him. The east gate was there. It was unlatched. The young private had kept his word. Just as they reached it, a massive, orange explosion lit up the night from the other side of the fort, the ammunition shed. A sheet of flame roared into the sky, followed by the pop-pop-pop of cooking cartridges. The bandit had kept his bargain. The fort dissolved into chaos. Men were shouting, running toward the fire, running from the prison. The alarm bell was just one sound in a symphony of panic. 2 horses were inside the gate, saddled, just as the private had promised. Greyhawk threw Ginny onto one, his hands like iron on her waist.
"Ride!" he roared.
He mounted the other, his face a mask of pain. They burst from the gate and into the open darkness. From the balcony of his quarters, Captain Nathaniel Briggs appeared, a long coat thrown over his nightshirt, a pistol in his hand. He saw them. He saw the fire devouring his ammo depot. He saw his prisoner and his mad fiancée escaping together. His face, in the orange light of the explosion, was a mask of pure, demonic rage. "Find them!" he screamed at the sky, his voice tearing. "Find them and kill them. I will hunt them to the ends of the earth. Do you hear me? To the ends of the earth." They rode north, into the high mountains, away from the flat, open desert where the cavalry would have the advantage. The rain was their ally, washing away their tracks, turning the world into a black, cold, impenetrable curtain. They rode until the horses were stumbling, their lungs burning, until the thunderstorm had passed, leaving behind a cold, thick fog that clung to the high pines. The world was gray, silent, and freezing. Greyhawk was slumped over his horse's neck. He was losing blood, a dark stain spreading from his thigh, visible even in the dim, gray light. We must stop," Ginny said, her own body numb, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. He nodded, sliding from the horse. He almost fell, catching himself on a tree. His breath was coming in short, pained gasps. "Here," he whispered, gesturing with his head. It was a ruin, an old, forgotten line cabin, half swallowed by the forest, its roof sagging, its door hanging from one hinge. But it was shelter. They stumbled inside. It smelled of pine needles, wet rock, and old animal. Ginny, her fingers numb, used her last strength to gather dry tinder from a corner. Greyhawk, his back against the wall, his knife in his hand, managed to strike a spark from his flint. A small, weak, smoky fire began to burn, a pitiful orange eye in the gray fog. The reality of their situation, the sheer, impossible weight of it, fell on Ginny like a physical blow. They were in the middle of nowhere. He was badly wounded. The entire United States Army was, at this very moment, being sent to hunt them. They would be caught. He would be shot on sight. And she would be dragged back. The madwoman, the traitor, the Apache's whore. She fell to her knees in the dirt. The cold, wet dress, the one she had escaped in, clung to her. She began to shake, her whole body convulsing. The sobs were not like before, not the tears of a frightened girl. They were a raw, soundless tearing, her body shaking itself apart. Greyhawk watched her, his face a mask of pain. The firelight flickered on the wetness of his own cheeks. He was not crying for himself. He was not crying for her. He was crying for Tahan, for the boy he had seen shot, the boy whose face he would see until he died. We are going to die," she whispered, the words torn from her. "He will find us. He will kill you. And he will take me back." She looked up at him, her eyes wild, her face a ruin of tears and mud. Don't let him take me back." She crawled to him, her last defense gone. Her hands grabbed the wet, cold buckskin of his shirt. "Dasan, Greyhawk, don't push me away. Not now." Her voice broke, a sound of utter desolation. "Don't stop loving me." She pressed her face into his wounded, cold chest, her shoulders heaving. "Please, don't let me be their doll again." He sat frozen. His heart was a stone. It was Tahan's blood on his hands. It was Nalin's curse in his ears. He had failed his people. He had failed the boy. And this woman, she was the enemy. She was the white, soft poison that had started it all. I cannot," he whispered, his voice choked. "I cannot love the enemy." He tried to push her away, his hands going to her shoulders, but they would not obey. She was shaking so hard. She was so cold. He looked at her, and he did not see the captain's woman. He did not see the engineer's daughter. He saw the woman who had knelt in the dirt and confessed her weakness. He saw the woman who had faced down his sister, the woman who had, in the end, come back, who had walked into the fort's prison, a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse, to free him. His own rigid defenses, the ones that had been built by years of loss and war, shattered, with a sound, a groan of utter, profound surrender. He wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her tight against him, his hand burying itself in her wet, tangled hair, his face pressing against the top of her head. "Do not stop loving me, Virgin," he whispered, the name no longer a joke, but a prayer. "Because I cannot stop. I cannot." He held her, his own body trembling with the force of his broken heart. "Darlin!" he choked out, the word a foreign, beautiful, terrible thing on his tongue. "Dasan Chi, my darling, I will love you till death." He said it in English, a vow. Then he said it in Apache, a promise to the spirits. His words a low, fierce chant against her hair. "I will love you until the mountains are dust, and my bone has turned to sand, and my spirit has forgotten its own name. I have chosen you." He had chosen her, not revenge, not his past, not his grief, though it was still a living fire in his gut. He had chosen this one, small, impossible future. They stayed like that, holding each other, the small fire their only witness, the cold fog their blanket. He tended to his own leg, his face tight with pain as he packed it with moss. Ginny tore a long strip from her petticoat, the last ragged piece of her old life, and bound the wound for him, her hands gentle. They did not speak. There were no more words. In the small, ruined cabin, sheltered from the world that wanted to kill them, they came together. It was not a grand passion, not the stuff of Eastern novels. It was something more desperate and more real. It was a confirmation of life in the face, of death. It was the trembling of her hands as they touched his scarred, hard body. A map of a life she could not imagine. It was the impossible, shocking gentleness of his rough, calloused fingers as he brushed the tears from her cheeks, his touch as light as a feather. It was trust, a trust built in a sandstorm and forged in a flood. It was the taste of salt, his and hers, as his mouth finally found hers. A kiss that was not about lust, but about a desperate, shared need to be known. They were two souls who had been stripped of everything, their names, their people, their futures. And in that nothingness, They found the only thing that mattered. Ginny was no longer Virgin Heart, the object, the doll, the name she had been given. She was a woman in the arms of the man she had chosen, and who had, against all reason, chosen her. The sun rose, but the fog was so thick. The world was still a gray, silent room. They were alive. He was sitting, his back against the wall, his feverish head resting on his chest. She was curled against his side, his arms still heavy and warm around her, her own sleep a dead, exhausted weight. The spell was broken by the cold light.
"He will hunt us,"
Greyhawk said, his voice a dry rasp. He did not need to say who.
"He will send scouts. He will not stop. This is his land."
"I know," Ginny said. She sat up. Her body ached, every muscle screaming, but her mind was, for the first time in her entire life, completely clear. "We cannot run, not forever, even if we get away. He will have won." He looked at her, his eyes clouded with fever, but still sharp. "If we run," she said, her voice finding a new, hard strength, "we let him write the story. We let him say you were a rebel. We let him say I was a mad woman. We let him murder Tahan and call it a battle. We let him steal Sacred Canyon." She shook her head. "He will win. We will be free. But our truth will be dead." She stood up, her bare feet on the cold, dirt floor. She picked up her diary, which she had stuffed into the bodice of her dress. It was warped and damp, but it was intact. "I will not run," she said. "I will not let him win." Greyhawk watched her. He saw the pale girl from the train. He saw the teacher in the dust. And he saw the woman who had walked into his prison. He slowly, painfully, used the wall to pull himself to his feet. He took her face in his hands. "If we go back," he whispered, his breath hot, "we die." "If we go back," she said, her voice shaking, but her eyes steady. "We go back with the truth." She laid her hand over his. "We may die, but at least we will be free in our own hearts." He looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he nodded. "We will go back. Not to surrender. We will go back, and we will show them what a real battle looks like." They did not return to the fort. They returned to the scene of the crime. Greyhawk, his leg bound tightly with Ginny's petticoat, his face pale and slick with the sweat of his fever, led her not to the town, but back to the Copper Pass. His jaw was set, his movements economical, saving every ounce of strength. The soldiers, in their haste to celebrate their victory and secure their rebel leader, had been sloppy. "Here," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He pointed to a shallow grave, barely covered with rocks. "The men I killed, the ones who attacked you first." Ginny, her hands raw, her body aching, helped him. They dug. The sun was hot, and the work was grim, but they found what he knew was there. The bodies of the Apache raiders, beneath the hastily applied paint. The skin was white, and in one man's pocket, Greyhawk found it a small, lead soldier figurine, one that was standard issue at the fort sutlery. "His friends," Ginny breathed, the word tasting like poison. "There is more," Greyhawk said, his voice tight with pain. He led her to a high, rocky cleft, a place he had seen the bandits use as a cache during the final, fatal battle. There, hidden under a tarp, were boxes. He tore one open. Ginny gasped. Rifles, army issue, the same rifles the soldiers carried at the fort, their serial numbers not even filed off, and a box of army issue ammunition. This was the proof. This, combined with what she carried, was their only weapon. Ginny had her own precious, terrible cache. She had her damp, warped diary, its pages filled with her confession and her observations. She had the letters she had stolen from Briggs's desk, the ones from the railroad man, Wallace, urging a swift resolution to the native problem. And she had the map, her own father's map, the one she had snatched from the office, its clean, precise engineer's lines showing the proposed railroad track running, in blatant violation of the treaty, straight through the heart of the sacred canyon. They had no army. They had only the truth, a collection of paper and lead and dead men's lies. They hid in the high rocks for a day, watching the town of Mercy Ridge. They were hunted, but the hunt was disorganized. Briggs's main force was still, as Ginny had known, guarding the empty sacred canyon, securing his new acquisition. The patrols near the town were a formality. They watched as the town transformed. Banners, red, white, and blue, were strung from the saloon to the new raw lumber railroad station. An entire car, draped in bunting, had been pushed to the end of the line. A speaker's platform was erected, decorated with flags. The railroad dignitaries, stiff men in black suits and top hats, had arrived on a special train, their faces beaming with profit and progress. This was the day, the grand inauguration of the Mercy Ridge Line, the celebration of the security that Captain Briggs had brought. The town square was full. A brass band, painfully out of tune, was playing a patriotic march. The officials were on the platform, alongside the post chaplain and Ginny's own father, Alexander Hart, who looked gray and old and ill. And then Captain Nathaniel Briggs stepped forward. He was magnificent. His uniform was brushed. His brass buttons shone like gold. His blonde hair was a cap of sunlight. He was the hero, the savior of the territory, the man who had, in the space of a week, captured the rebel leader, secured the land, and made the railroad safe. He raised his hand. The band stopped. The crowd of soldiers, settlers, and newspapermen who had come to document the glorious event fell silent. "Gentlemen," Briggs began, his voice rolling across the square, full of confidence and power. "Honored guests, citizens of Mercy Ridge, today, we do not just lay a track. We lay the very foundation of civilization. We have faced darkness. We have faced the savagery that, for too long, has held this great land hostage." He paused, his face growing grim, his voice full of righteous sorrow. "We have paid for this progress. We have paid in the blood of our women, in the lives of our brave soldiers. We have faced a brutal, unprovoked rebellion, led by the savage known as Greyhawk." "He is not a savage." The voice was a woman's, clear, high, and sharp as broken glass. It cut through the stunned silence. The crowd parted, a wave of murmurs and gasps. Virginia Hart, her blue Eastern dress gone, walked into the center of the square. She was wearing a simple, borrowed buckskin dress, Nayland's, one she had been given in the camp. Her hair was unbound. Her feet were in ruined shoes. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were blazing. And at her side, his arm wrapped around her waist, supporting her and being supported by her, was Greyhawk. He was not a prisoner. He was unarmed, his body scarred, his legs still bleeding, but his head was high. He was not a captive. He was her partner. The town, the soldiers, the dignitaries, all stood frozen. Her father, on the platform, looked as if he had seen a ghost. His hand went to his heart. "Virginia." Reverend Michael's jaw dropped. And Captain Briggs, his face, his perfect, heroic face, turned a shade of white that was almost gray. The blood drained from it, leaving only the cold, blue eyes, which were now wide, not with fear, but with a sudden, animalistic rage.
"Stop this,"
Briggs commanded, his voice tight.
"Soldiers, seize that man. He is a murderer."
"He is a witness," Ginny shouted, her voice shaking but gaining power. She walked forward, dragging Greyhawk with her, until she was at the foot of the platform. "And you, Captain Briggs, are the murderer." A collective gasp. The reporters scribbled, "Frantic."
"She is mad," Briggs roared, finding his voice. "She has been bewitched. She is hysterical, broken by her capture. She does not know what she is saying. Arrest them."
"I know exactly what I am saying," Ginny cried, and she held up the first piece of paper, It was a letter. I know that you paid white men, murderers, to dress as Apache and attack a wagon. To start your war, I know you hired them. Lies, the ravings of a madwoman. Is this a raving? Ginny shouted, and she threw the small, lead soldier onto the platform. It landed with a small, metallic clink at Briggs's feet. We found it on the body of the savage who attacked me first. One of your own fort's toys. She held up the next piece. Is this madness a map, my own father's map, showing the railroad line, the line you forced him to draw, running straight through Sacred Canyon, a violation of the treaty you swore to uphold? Her father, Alexander Hart, looked at the map in her hand, and then at her, his face ashen. He knew what it was. And is this? She screamed, her voice breaking with the sheer force of her own truth. Is this madness? She held up her own, warped, mud-stained diary. This is my word, my testimony. I was there, I saw you. Captain Briggs. In the canyon, I saw you execute your own paid bandits. I saw my friend. I saw Tahan, a boy, shot down by a blind, panicked shot. And I heard you. I heard you call it a battle. You did not fight a battle. You conducted a massacre. The crowd was a sea of stunned, silent faces. The soldiers, the ones who had been in that canyon, were looking at each other, their own faces pale with a new, dawning, sickening understanding. She lies, Briggs stammered, his confident mask shattering. He was looking at the dignitaries, at the reporters. He was losing. She was his lover. She is a traitor. Seize her, seize them both. The only traitor here is you, Ginny screamed, pointing at him. A traitor to your uniform, a traitor to your treaty, and a traitor to every man, woman, and child you murdered for this line of iron. Briggs was undone. He saw his career, his promotion, his entire life, dissolving in front of him. He looked at the hard, unforgiving faces of the railroad men. He looked at the soldiers, who were no longer looking at him as a hero, but as a monster. He did the only thing a coward could do. He ran. He leaped from the platform and ran, not toward his men, but toward the decorated train. To me, he roared at the few men, his personal, loyal guard, who were still willing to follow. To the train, we are leaving. He was running, scrambling into the bunting-draped engine car, his men piling in after him. He was trying to escape, to take the engine, to get away with his own skin. He has the papers, Ginny screamed, realizing. The proof, he is taking the rest of the proof. Greyhawk was already moving. He was not a prisoner. He was a warrior. He grabbed Ginny's hand. Come. He ran, his limp pronounced, but he was fast. He ran toward the moving train. The engine was already chugging, the wheels beginning to spin, pulling the first few cars. They ran alongside, the crowd scattering. Greyhawk, with a grunt of pain, grabbed a handhold on a flat car and swung himself up, pulling Ginny up after him. They were on the train. Briggs was in the engine, frantically trying to build up steam. They were lurching, gaining speed, leaving the station, leaving the stunned, silent crowd behind. Stop him, Ginny yelled, and she scrambled over the coupling, moving toward the engine. The fight was brutal and quick. One of Briggs's loyal corporals emerged from the engine, a heavy iron coal shovel in his hand. He swung it at Ginny's head. Greyhawk met him. He moved, despite his wound, like a shadow. He dodged the clumsy swing, grabbed the man's arm, used his momentum, and threw him. The soldier screamed as he flew from the train, tumbling onto the tracks. They were on the roof of the tender car now, the wind tearing at them, the engine smoke stinging their eyes. Ahead, the world opened up. The high trestle bridge, a skeleton of new, yellow wood, spanning a 1,000-foot drop. The train was picking up speed, rattling, shaking, as it hit the bridge. The door to the engine cab slid open. Captain Nathaniel Briggs stood there, his face no longer human. It was a mask of pure, white-hot hatred. In his hand, he held his pistol.
"You!"
He screamed over the roar of the wind.
"You ruin me!"
He raised the pistol. And at that moment, the bridge, the hastily built, greedily constructed, shortcut of a bridge, gave a terrible, groaning shudder. The wood, not properly cured, not properly braced, gave way. The trestle did not collapse all at once. It sagged, a long, groaning tear as the train's weight hit the unsupported center span. Briggs was thrown off balance. He fired, but the shot went wild, screaming into the sky. He staggered, dropping the pistol, his hands flailing. He fell, not from the train, but with the train, as the tender car and the engine separated from the flat car, tilting, sickeningly, into the void. Ginny screamed. Greyhawk lunged, grabbing her, pulling her back onto the flat car, just as the coupling snapped. The engine, the tender, and Captain Nathaniel Briggs were hanging. He had been thrown clear of the cab, his body slamming into the side, his hand miraculously, agonizingly, catching on a piece of twisted iron. He was dangling, 200 feet above the canyon floor. He looked up. He saw Ginny, staring in horror from the edge of the flat car. Their car, its momentum gone, had stopped, its back wheels still on solid ground, its front hanging over the abyss.
"Help me!"
Briggs choked, his knuckles white.
"Hart, Ginny, for God's sake, help me!"
Ginny took a step forward. And then Briggs's other hand, his free hand, shot out and grabbed a dangling rope of bunting. He pulled, his face contorted. He was not asking for help. He was trying to get a purchase, to pull himself up, to get to her.
"Ginny!"
He snarled, his mask of civility gone, revealing the devil underneath.
"You whore, you will come with me!"
He lunged, using his last strength to swing, his hand, his fingers, grabbing at her ankle. She screamed, falling backward. Greyhawk did not hesitate. He did not have a weapon. He had a choice. He grabbed a heavy iron pin from the coupling. He could have thrown it, tried to hit Briggs, to end it, but he did not. He turned his back on the dangling, screaming man. He turned to Ginny, who was scrambling away from the edge, and he grabbed her. He pulled her up. He put his body between her and the man who wanted to drag her into hell. He chose her. He chose life. A final, terrible wooden crack. The rope of bunting snapped. The twisted iron, weakened, tore free. Captain Nathaniel Briggs looked up, his eyes wide with a final, shocking understanding. He had been killed, not by the Apache, not by Ginny, but by his own shoddy, impatient, greedy railroad. He screamed, a long, thin sound that was swallowed by the wind as he fell, a tiny blue speck into the darkness of the canyon he had tried to steal. The flat car gave a final, shuddering lurch, and then settled, balanced precariously on the edge of the broken bridge. Silence. The silence was broken by a new sound, a thin, terrified wail. From the next car back, the one that had been for the dignitaries, the one that had not derailed, a small, white face, streaked with tears, appeared in the window. A little boy, no more than 5, the son of one of the railroad investors, who had been brought along for the celebration. He was trapped. The car was creaking, threatening to follow the engine.
My mama!"
The boy cried. Greyhawk looked at Ginny. He was bleeding. He was exhausted. He had just faced his devil. He turned and began to walk, unsteadily, back toward the car. He did not have a key. The door was locked. He used the heavy iron pin he was still holding. He smashed the window, the glass shattering. He reached in, his own arm cutting on the glass, and unlocked the door from the inside. He stumbled in. The crowd, which had run from the station, had arrived at the edge of the chasm. They stood, 100 witnesses, including Alexander Hart and the Reverend, and the stunned, pale-faced reporters. They watched as the savage, the murderer, the animal, Greyhawk emerged from the listing, groaning car. He was not carrying a weapon. He was carrying a small, blonde-haired, crying white child in his arms. He walked, his leg dragging, across the unsteady flat car, his own blood mixing with the boy's tears. He did not look at the crowd. He walked straight to Ginny, who was waiting on the solid ground. He handed her the child. And then, and only then, did he fall, collapsing to his knees, his strength finally gone, his head bowed, in the dust. The train car, its last passenger evacuated, gave a final, tired sigh and slid, with a magnificent, terrible sound, into the canyon, exploding in a fireball of steam and burning wood on the rocks below. Alexander Hart ran forward, his face a mask of unbelievable, terrible understanding. He looked, not at his daughter, but at the kneeling Apache, the man who had just saved his grandchild's generation. He looked at the man who had saved his daughter, while the man he had trusted had tried to kill her. The smoke from the burning train rose high into the blue Arizona sky, a dark, heavy pillar, a signal that everyone, for 100 miles, could see. The truth, finally, could not be buried. The smoke from the chasm hung over Mercy Ridge for a full day, a dark, funeral pyre that could not be ignored. The explosion, the death of a commanding officer, the collapse of the brand-new bridge, and the presence of a dozen reporters and railroad investors meant that the truth, this time, could not be swept under a rug or buried in a shallow grave. An investigation was convened, not by the local fort, but by a stern-faced colonel sent from headquarters, a man with cold eyes who did not like his officers starting private wars. The railroad, facing a lawsuit from the investor who had nearly lost his son, and a public relations nightmare, sent its own team of inquisitors. The dam of lies, built so carefully by Captain Briggs, crumbled in a matter of hours. Ginny, no longer a prisoner, but the investigation's star witness, presented her diary. Her father, his face gray and etched with a shame so profound he could barely speak, presented his own maps, his own orders, his own complicity. The young private, his life saved by Greyhawk, tearfully confessed to his part in the escape, but also to the culture of fear and hatred Briggs had fostered. The captured bandit, seeing his chance, sang, telling the entire sword video story of payments, fake paint, and the planned massacre at Copper Pass, a story that was corroborated by the soldiers who had, themselves, been forced to fire on their allies. The investigation uncovered all the falsified reports, the payroll theft, the deliberate, cold-blooded plan to incite a war to break a treaty for profit. Captain Briggs, who had been a hero 2 days prior, was now a name spoken with contempt. His body left to the coyotes at the bottom of the canyon he had died for. While the white world was cleaning its house, Greyhawk was in the post's infirmary. The army doctor, a man more used to setting bones and treating gunshot wounds than dealing with politics, had set his leg and stitched his arm. He was not a prisoner. Not anymore. He was a political problem, and, to some, a hero. Alexander Hart sat in his office, the one that had been the center of his world, the hub of his grand project. He looked at the map, the beautiful, precise map he had drawn, the one Ginny had held up as a weapon. He saw it now as she had not a line of progress, but a knife, aimed directly at the heart of a people. He had been so proud of his lines, his calculations. He saw, now, that he had only been drawing a scar. He took his letter of resignation, which he had written the night before, and walked to the colonel's office. "Colonel," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "my work here is done. My engineering was flawed. It did not take the terrain into account, the human terrain." He unrolled a new map, one he had stayed up all night drawing. "The line is unstable. The trestle collapse is proof. It must be rerouted, south, around the canyon, through the barren lands. It will cost more. It will take another year, but it is the only moral route. The colonel, looking at the broken, proud man, knew this was not an engineer's correction. It was a confession, an atonement. He nodded slowly. Your recommendation will be strongly considered, Mr. Hart. Greyhawk was released. His leg was in a splint, and he walked with the aid of a carved stick. He was given his freedom, and something more. The colonel, a practical man who needed to end this conflict, had offered him a position. Negotiator, he had called it. A bridge, he had said, using the same poisoned word Greyhawk and Ginny had used. He would be the liaison between the fort, which was now under new, stricter command, and his people, who were still hiding in the mountains. He was not a savage anymore. He was a political asset. But the town of Mercy Ridge was not a military tribunal. As Ginny walked, for the first time, to the infirmary to see him, she felt the stares. The town was split down the middle. That's her, a woman whispered from the porch of the general store, pulling her child close. The captain's girl, the one who turned a race traitor, if you ask me.
Ought to be ashamed, a man at the saloon spat. Sleeping with a redskin. No better than a squaw.
But others saw it differently. The family of the young boy Greyhawk had saved ran to her, the mother weeping, clutching Ginny's hands. God bless you, Miss Hart, and God bless that brave man. We did not know. We did not see. The reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle tipped his hat. You are a very brave woman, ma'am. You told the truth.
She was a pariah, and she was a hero. She was trapped between the two, belonging to neither.
And in the Apache camp, which was slowly, tentatively reforming in the shadow of the fort, the suspicion was just as deep. The children, her former pupils, ran to her, their faces bright, calling her name. They touched her dress, and they brought her small, smooth stones as gifts. But the elders and Darlin kept their distance. They accepted the new rations, the ones her father's resignation had helped secure, but their eyes were old and cold and full of the memory of Tahan's body. The great negotiation was held at the edge of the sacred canyon itself. A week later, it was a strange, tense scene. On one side, under a canvas army tent, sat the new colonel, his aides, and a nervous, sweating representative from the railroad. On the other side, sitting on the red earth, were the Apache elders, Darlin, and at their head, Greyhawk. Ginny sat behind him, not with him, but behind him. She was not a negotiator. She was his shadow, his witness. The bargaining was hard. The elders wanted blood. The army wanted submission. But Greyhawk, his voice low and steady, spoke a new language. He spoke of the map. He spoke of the treaty. He spoke of the witnesses. He was not begging for scraps. He was making demands, backed by the truth. An agreement was reached, written on new white paper. Sacred Canyon, and the land surrounding it, would be a permanent, protected reserve. The Army's presence at the fort would be halved. The railroad, following Alexander Hart's new map, would be moved south. In exchange, the Apache would receive a guarantee of their borders and a shipment of cattle, grain, and supplies. Not as rations, but as payment. It was not a perfect peace. It was just a pause in the war, but it was a victory. That evening, Ginny and Greyhawk stood on the ridge, watching the sunset paint the clouds over the canyon, their canyon.
It is done,
he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. For now, she said. She looked back at the lights of the fort, and then at the small, flickering fires of the Apache camp. Where? Where do we go? Dasan, I cannot go back to the fort. My father is leaving, going back east. I will not go with him. He looked at the Apache camp. My sister, She has lost her son. They see Tahan's ghost when they look at me. They see your white skin when they look at you. We are a wound. To them. Not yet. They were trapped. Too Apache for the white town. Too white for the Apache. Then we will not choose, he said, his hand finding hers. It was the first time he had touched her in days. His grip was warm and solid. We will make our own place. He pointed. In the low valley between the town and the protected lands of the canyon, there was a small, green patch, a place where a spring seeped from the rock, a place with a few ancient cottonwood trees. It was on no one's map. It was not the forts, and it was not the reserves. It was just in between. There, he said, we will build our house there. We will be the bridge, but we will be our own bridge. The next months were the hardest and the most beautiful of Ginny's life. They lived in a tent, and then, slowly, with wood scavenged from the ruined trestle, they built a small, sturdy cabin. It had 2 rooms, a fireplace made of river stone, and a porch that faced the canyon. He taught her. He taught her how to ride, not side saddle like a lady, but astride, like an Apache, her legs gripping the horse, her body moving with the animal, a part of it. He taught her the names of the stars in his own language. He taught her which plants to eat, and which would kill her. And she taught him. She took out her water-stained primers, the ones from her school, and she taught him, not just to speak, but to read. His brow would furrow in concentration, his deep voice stumbling, beautifully, over the hard, sharp English words. "The cat sat on the mat," he would read, his finger tracing the line, his voice full, and then he would look at her, his dark eyes full of a strange, new light, and they would laugh, a real, deep, shared laugh, a sound that began to heal the rawness of their shared trauma. One night, they lay on a blanket on the hill behind their small, unfinished ranch, the sky a vast, diamond-sharp blanket above them. "I used to dream of children," she said, her voice soft, her head resting on his shoulder. I thought I would have them in a big, white house in Boston." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought I would have no children. I thought my line would end with Tahan, with blood and ash." She turned, her hand tracing the scar on his jaw. "We could," she whispered. "We could have children. Here, they would. They would belong to both worlds. They would have your eyes, and my stubbornness." He turned, his face serious in the starlight. He kissed her, a long, slow, deep kiss that was not about desperation, but about building. It was a kiss of promise, of a future. Their peace was fragile, but it was real. One afternoon, as Greyhawk was mending the new roof of their small corral, a figure on a pony approached. It was Darlin. Ginny's heart stopped. She stood up from the small garden she was trying to coax from the desert soil, her hands dirty. Darlin stopped her pony a few feet away. She looked at the cabin. She looked at Ginny, in her simple, practical skirt. She looked at Greyhawk on the roof, who had paused, his hammer in his hand. Darlin dismounted. She held something in her hand. She walked to Ginny. Her face was still carved with grief, but the raw hatred, the fire that had wanted to burn Ginny alive, was banked. "My brother," Darlin said, her voice flat, "is a fool. He thinks he can live in 2 worlds. We are trying," Ginny said, her voice quiet. "He belongs to us," Darlin said, "but he also belongs to this." She looked at Ginny's hands, at the dirt under her nails. "You have helped him. You have kept him from dying in his own past, from his own anger." Darlin held out her hand. In it was a necklace. It was not a grand thing. It was a simple leather thong, beaded with blue and white stones, and from the center, tied with sinew, hung 2 small, perfectly gray hawk feathers.
"This," Nayland said, "was our grandmother's. It is of our family." She pressed it into Ginny's hand. I do not trust your people. The men in the blue coats are still murderers. The men with the iron are still thieves." She looked Ginny in the eye. "But I will try. I will try to trust you." Ginny's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the necklace, the feathers soft against her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. Nalin nodded. Once. She turned, mounted her pony, and rode away, not looking back. Ginny stood there, the necklace in her hand, the sun hot on her head. She felt a strange exhaustion. The last few mornings, the smell of the coffee Greyhawk was brewing, a smell she usually loved, had made her stomach turn. A wave of dizziness and a strange, sudden fatigue passed over her. She put her hand on her own stomach, a sudden, impossible, terrifying thought blooming in her mind. She looked up at Greyhawk, who was watching her from the roof, his face full of a question. She smiled. It was a small, watery, terrified, and utterly, profoundly happy smile. And she knew, in that moment, that their bridge was no longer just an idea. It was, perhaps, already being built. A year had passed. Spring came to the high desert not as a gentle suggestion, but as a fierce, sudden reclamation. The land, scoured and scarred by the previous year's violence, seemed desperate to prove its resilience. It choked the gray rock with purple flowers and carpeted the dry washes with a pale, defiant green. In the small valley that sat between the fort and the newly drawn border of the Sacred Canyon Reserve, the ranch stood finished. It was not a fortress, nor was it a temporary camp. It was a home. The cabin, built of scavenged railroad ties and sturdy pine, was solid. Its 2 rooms smelling of cedar and wood smoke. A small, neat stable housed 2 horses, and in the protected patch of earth near the spring, a garden was thriving. Rows of green corn and climbing beans, a mix of Apache and Eastern planting, growing side by side. Virginia Hart, no longer virgin, no longer the captain's woman, sat on the wide porch of her home. The porch had become a schoolhouse. On a bench before her sat 6 children. 2 were the freckled, pale-skinned children of a settler family from the town. 3 were Apache, shy and dark-eyed, who walked the 2 miles from the reserve every morning. The last was her own. Inside the cabin, the walls were no longer bare. Ginny had found time to paint again, but her subjects were not the green, remembered oceans of her childhood. They were sketches of the mountains, sharp and red, a drawing of the new, winding river that had been born from the flood, and, in a place of honor over the fireplace, a painting of a train. It was the Iron Snake, but it was not a monster. In her painting, the track curved, respectfully, around the base of a great canyon, its smoke rising harmlessly into a peaceful, blue sky. Her role was here. She was the teacher, the mother, the artist. Greyhawk's role was in the world beyond. He was, by necessity, a commuter between 2 civilizations. He returned that afternoon, not on the wild pony of his warrior days, but on a strong, steady bay horse, the kind favored by the army. He no longer wore just buckskin. Today, he wore a simple linen shirt, the kind sold at the town sutlery, with his worn Apache leggings. He looked like what he was, a man who belonged to 2 worlds, and to neither. He rode between the Apache camp, where he advised the elders on the new, complex treaties, and the railroad office in Mercy Ridge, where he worked as a translator, a paid cultural interpreter. The railroad men, wary but respectful, called him Mr. Greyhawk. He ensured the cattle payments arrived, that the surveyors did not stray from the new, agreed-upon lines. He was, for the first time in his life, not a scout forced into service, not a prisoner in chains, but a bridge, built of his own free will. He was tired.
The weight of words, he had told her, was sometimes heavier than the weight of chains. He swung down from his horse, his limp, the one from the bullet in his thigh, still pronounced when he was weary. From the dirt patch by the porch, a small figure, unsteady on his new feet, let out a squeal of delight. He was a perfect contradiction, a beautiful paradox. He had his father's eyes, a gray so deep it was almost black, and a halo of fine, bright hair, the color of his mother's. He toddled forward, his arms raised. Greyhawk, the man who had faced down soldiers and bandits, the man who had lost his family to violence, melted. A slow, rare smile transformed his face. He bent, sweeping the boy into his arms, burying his face in the child's bright hair. The boy, named Tahan, in memory of the cousin who had been lost, was the living proof of their new world. He played, without thought, with the white children from the town, chasing a chicken around the yard. He played, just as easily, with the Apache children, his laughter mixing with theirs, his small hands already learning the feel of the red earth. He did not see the boundaries. He simply crossed them, every day. That evening, after the children had gone home and their own son was asleep in his small, carved cradle, the cabin was quiet. Greyhawk sat at the table, his shoulders slumped with a fatigue that was more than just physical. He had spent all day arguing with a railroad bureaucrat about a misplaced fence line. Ginny brought a basin of warm water from the stove. She set it before him. He nodded, his eyes closed. She knelt and began to wash the dust and trail grime from his hands. It was a ritual they had. She did not fuss. She simply served. Her fingers, no longer the soft, pale hands of a Boston lady, were strong and gentle. She found a new scratch on his forearm, from a piece of wire, and cleaned it. He opened his eyes, watching her. His gaze was heavy and full of a deep, quiet possession. When she was finished, he did not pull his hand away. He turned it, lacing his fingers with hers. He drew her forward. Their kiss was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the storm cabin. It was not the fast, breathless kiss of their reunion. It was slow. It was certain. It was the kiss of two people who had earned their peace, who knew the cost of every single, quiet moment. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and soap and wood smoke, and a love that was as solid and real as the stone floor beneath their feet. Later, in the darkness of their room, the only light came from the moon, slivering through the window. The child was breathing softly. Ginny lay on her back, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand on his chest. The old fear, the one she thought she had buried, sometimes returned in these quiet moments. "Dasan," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost just a breath. "I am here," he rumbled. "Do you ever regret it?" He was very still. "Regret what?" "This." Her hand moved, indicating the cabin, the sleeping child, her own body next to his. "Do you ever wish you were still alone in the high mountains, or that you had stayed fully with Darlin and the tribe? Do you ever feel trapped that I was just the white woman who changed your path, the one who stopped you from being the warrior you were?" It was the question that had haunted her from the beginning, that she was not his partner, but his burden. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the cry of a distant coyote. He shifted, turning on his side to face her. He put his hand on her cheek, his calloused thumb stroking her skin. "When I lived alone," he said, his voice a low, deep vibration in the darkness. "I was breathing. I was not alive. When I lived for my people, I was a ghost, a memory of a war we had already lost." He leaned in, his forehead touching hers. "You," he whispered, "are the one who taught me how to live." He took her face between his two hands, his gaze holding hers in the dim light. "If I had lived alone, I would have died alone. Darlin, I will love you till death." He paused, and a small, Soft smile touched his lips. And if the spirits allow, after that too. He was repeating the vow he had made in the ruined, rain-soaked cabin, when he was bleeding and they were hunted. But that had been a desperate oath, a promise made in the dark. This was a promise made in the light, in their home, a promise of a man who was no longer haunted, but whole. The world outside, the world they had held at bay, did not disappear. A week later, a mail rider, a new, regular addition to the territory, stopped at their ranch. He brought a letter from her father, back in Boston, and a newspaper, already 3 weeks old. Ginny read the news, her heart growing heavy. In a different territory, far to the north, a different railroad was being built, and a different tribe, the Cheyenne, was being pushed from their land. There were reports of a skirmish, of savage attacks. It was the same story, the same lies. She looked up, her eyes meeting Greyhawk's over the table. They understood. They had not saved the world. They had not stopped the endless grinding machine of progress. They had only saved their small piece of it. They could not stop the ocean. They had only, by some miracle, built a small, safe harbor on the shore. Their story was not an end. It was an example. That night, as the air grew cool, they built a small fire in the ring of stones in their yard. The children from the reserve and the children from the town had gathered. It was becoming a tradition. Tahan, their son, sat on Ginny's lap, his eyes wide and sleepy. Greyhawk sat on a log, the firelight playing on the strong, scarred lines of his face. He was the storyteller. The children, a mix of white and Apache, sat at his feet, their faces upturned, their animosities forgotten in the magic of the flame. He began to speak, his voice low and mesmerizing, telling them one of the old legends of his people, and then he segued, his voice softening, telling them a new legend. There was a warrior, he said, his eyes finding Ginny's across the flames, who had sworn his heart was stone. He had sworn he would never love anything, for everything he loved was turned to dust. He was a man who had forgotten how to live. Ginny held her son, her own heart full to bursting. And then, Greyhawk continued, a woman came. She came from the east, from the great salt sea. She had eyes the color of the ocean. She was afraid, but she was brave. And she taught the stone-hearted warrior how to break. She taught him that to live, you must be willing to lose. She taught him how to love again. Ginny listened to her own life, their own pain, their own impossible journey, being woven into the mythology of this new land. It was their story, told to a generation of children who belonged to both worlds, and who would, perhaps, not have to fight the same battles. The fire burned low. The children, sleepy, were collected by their parents. The night grew vast and cold and silent. Ginny and Greyhawk stood alone, the embers glowing at their feet. The wind, the eternal voice of the desert, whispered through the new cottonwoods by the spring. Ginny leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Don't stop loving me," she whispered. It was not a plea, it was a statement, a reminder, the closing words of their nightly prayer. He turned, kissing the top of her head. He spoke, mixing the two languages that were now one in their home. Shikiz, he said, the Apache word for his dearest friend, his love. Darlin, I never stopped. They stood for a long time, two small figures, silhouetted against the enormous, star-filled, western sky. The world was still vast, and it was still, in many ways, unjust. But they had not been conquered by it. They had built their own world, in the small, sacred space between. They had written their own story, and they were, at last, at peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with all of you. So please, leave a comment below and let me know where you are listening from, and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.